Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
As I read and enjoyed your book, I held it alongside the very popular novel by Catherine Stockett, The Help. And I couldn't remember in The Help if they ever considered migrating. Did Catherine Stockett miss something that was really important?
Well, I have not read The Help because of this. I mean, I've been on tour. I've been all over the country, and I have not had the chance to read it. I will say, of course, that she would say that it's fiction, so she has a different purpose in writing her book. And this is nonfiction, in which I spent 15 years to really explore this underreported aspect of history. So I'm looking at it from a different perspective. So I can't speak to that. I can just say that as a culture, as American culture, and certainly when it comes to the schools, this deserves to be a little, not the book, but what these people did deserves more than a paragraph in a history book. And and that would be my goal.
Thank you.
The two of your three characters, Ida Mae Gladney and George Starling, came up partly, I think, because their children would have better opportunity than they did. However, it was dismaying to learn that that wasn't necessarily the case due to the terrible conditions that they experienced. Do you think that these individuals that you delved into were unique, or was that a generalized difficulty of the forces that they found in the city where their children had such a terrible...
Well, thank you for asking that question. The realities of the cities is that, and one of the things that had not been as well understood until the new data had come out, was that the people who were part of this Great Migration were more likely to have been married. They were more, migration often occurs with people who actually are leaving as married couples, or they arrive and find someone of often like-minded experience, meaning other migrants, whether they're from the same town or not, and they were more likely to be working more than one job, as a matter of fact, because when you're an immigrant, which is in some ways what they had been forced to become, they were American citizens who were forced to become immigrants in their own country in order to be recognized as citizens. They ended up working multiple jobs because failure is not an option for an immigrant. They have no other place really to turn to. And so the children were being raised in forbidding, anonymous, big places where actually it was the cities themselves that began to encroach on what would have been, a childhood that would have been very different out in the rural setting. That was one of the trade-offs that a migrant or immigrant has to make when they move to a big city. And the parents are working multiple jobs and not all often able to be there to protect them and did not have a community to support them. However, in Ida Mae Gladney's case, her children all ended up working. The grandchildren ended up working. They were hard-working, working-class people. George Starling had his children came upon great hardship and tragedy. Dr. Foster, the third person, his kids went on to college. So there's a great variety among the three. And in that respect, I think the people actually are reflective of what happens. You have one family where the children got pulled into the maelstrom of urban life, of street life, and all the temptations that occur. You have one where they went off to become bus drivers and workers for the CTA, and then you have another where they went on. Actually, Dr. Foster's daughter is a physician. So there's a wide variety of experiences that they ended up having, which makes them, I think, actually quite reflective of the norm for most of the people who are part of this. A little bit of everything. Thank you.
I have two questions. One has to do with what happens afterward. And I raise the question because the diaspora, shall we say, not only brings people from the same communities together, but people who have migrated into context with people like my son, who married a black woman. And the question I have is, have you come across much of that, and what direction might that be going? And the second question is, this young lady came from New Orleans, and there was a big family gathering for the parties and whatnot. One of the things that I was shocked to discover was within a family the prejudice between those who were light-colored and those who were dark-colored. Could you comment?
Yes, the caste system that I described had castes within castes. There were castes within castes having to do with religion, having to do with occupation, having to do with how people looked, and that caste system exists on many levels, and we're still dealing with the after effect of that caste system. And one of the things that people end up doing is they find ways to delineate, and that's one of the things that we still, I think the next step is moving past the remnants of the caste system and recognizing how much we all have in common. I mean, one of the goals of this, of being able to have people read this book and see themselves in these individuals whom they have nothing at all in common with on the face of it, and recognizing that they're actually, many people have told me when they're reading this part about Dr. Foster's drive, they're scared to death for him. They're actually just, can't wait to figure out what's going to happen, scared and worried. And that's a lovely thing, because the goal of this is to have people so identify with the people that they transcend what might be the physical delineations between people. And the goal, too, is to have the emotion that you feel be the emotion that he's feeling, not the emotion that one might expect a person to maybe have, which might be on one side guilt. For some people, feeling guilty that something happened to other people based upon no guilt, no time for guilt. Empathy and compassion is what the book is asking for. Empathy and compassion, seeing yourself in the lives and in the hearts and the minds of the individuals that you're reading about, Seeing that we have so much more in common with one another than we ever thought we might have had. And I love it when people say that they're actually worried for an individual, because that means that they have transcended the boundaries. And that's exactly what my goal would be. So the goal would be that we all see that.
Context of White Supremacy, Justice, Gus T Renegade, in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, August 9th, 2013, so I have been told. We will be back tomorrow, that would be Saturday, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Pacific. The compensatory call-in. Always look forward to hearing from victims of white supremacy, non-white people. Third installment of Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns, her 2010 publication. Really enjoyed the segments from last week. I'm hoping that trend will continue for the next couple of months as we seek to research, learn, hopefully enjoy I guess this will be the last book that we read for the summer, because the season will change before we complete this book. One thing that I wanted to get in, the audio clip that you heard this week, a listener mailed that to me. This was from a 2011 lecture that Miss Wilkerson conducted. And she mailed it to me, and she said she thought particularly the Q&A session was quite revealing. And you didn't have the images that accompanied the audio you just heard. If you watch the video, the camera's focused on Miss Wilkerson for about the first 45 minutes of the presentation. When it gets to the Q&A, the camera, it pulls back so you can see many of the crowd members. And I tell you, it is an ocean of pale, melanin-deficient, gray-haired, racist suspects. And just that image alone, before we even got to what any questions were asked, just that image alone is why I have such a high level of suspicion, and why I keep saying this book is going to be very challenging for me, because my tendency, just anytime where I see large, and they were standing up giving an ovation at the end, like, oh man, this is right, this is what. Normally that right there would be enough to ruin my whole interest in reading the book or anything, but I had to put Miss Wilkerson's picture up when I put the image on Black Talk Radio and Facebook and everything, just because I need that reminder. A gorgeous black female wrote this book. She's a victim of racism, and I'm going to make sure that I'm not chastising or talking bad about her, even though I might not agree with some of the words that are used or some of the assertions made in the book. She's a victim of racism. She researched for 15 years to put this book together, and I think we can get a lot of constructive info out of it, but it is going to be challenging for me, because my general tendency, once I see that, oceans of white people really liked and celebrated this, my normal tendency would be, I have totally lost interest in this project, wanting to read the book, once I find out that you've got a large chunk of white people who are just in love with this and celebrating this project. But I am trying to check that while we get through the book. If you feel like my anti-blackness is creeping up and I'm admonishing or judging Miss Wilkerson, feel free, dial in, let me know. I do want to point out when inaccurate terms are being used and or things are being said that do not lead to clear, accurate understanding of racism. I still want to pick those out, but doing so with compassion. A victim of white supremacy invested 15 years to put this book together, and I think there is a lot of constructive information that we can learn and use in the book. So, that said, moving forward, third installment, Isabel Wilkerson, The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration, Context of White Supremacy.
By the time they got old enough to work, most of the kids had dropped out of school altogether. By graduation day, there were only 6 seniors in the class of 1936 at Curtright Vocational Training School, and George Swanson Starling was valedictorian. He got accepted to Florida Agricultural and Mechanical State College in Tallahassee. His father did not really understand why he would want to go when he could be making a little money picking in the groves, but he sent him anyway. George came home with better than decent grades, but a year passed, and then another whole 6 months with other people working, and George just reading books. His father didn't see the point of it. In the middle of George's sophomore year, his father told him he'd gotten enough schooling, and it was time for him to work. Maybe he could pick it up later. Big George didn't see where it made much difference anyway. Hardly anybody they knew went to college. The father had only gone to 5th grade, and he was doing all right, running the store and packing fruit at the Eichelberger Packing Company. With 2 years of college, you should be able to be President of the United States, his father figured. But I'm taking a 4-year course number, and you dropping me in the middle of the stream. I'm not prepared to do anything because I'm only halfway there. George had made valedictorian at Curtright, and just as significant to him, was the only one from his high school to finish the first year of college without failing any subject. He thought he deserved better. But his father had made up his mind. Lil George was his namesake, but he wasn't his only concern. Big George had remarried since coming to Eustis. He had a wife now and 2 stepsons to think about. He had that little store to keep up and dreams of a little orange grove of his own for his old age. He wasn't willing to spend what money he had to send George back to school to study Socrates and polynomials. It was an outrageous indulgence when everybody else was working the groves every day. A few days later, George was looking for some papers. Rummaging through a dresser drawer, he found some postal receipts for deposits his father had made in a savings account at the post office. He had a drawer full of them, where he was saving in the post office, George said years later. But he was telling me he didn't have any money, and that made me angry. and I couldn't sense it into him that I needed to go on and get the other 2 years. So I just got angry and evil, and I decided I would do something to hurt him. George had gotten around with the girls, but he always seemed to come back to one in particular. Inez Cunningham was a girl from the backwoods, with full cheeks and a narrow waist, who had endured an even more unsettled childhood than he had. Her parents had died young and left her in the care of a Pentecostal aunt, who trotted her to late-night church meetings with holy rollers talking in tongues. She spent so much of her girlhood in the quaking pews of the Pentecostal church that she swore she would never join a church again if she got free. She kept her word, and never did. She wore plaits and plain dresses, and didn't have the pomaded hair some other girls had, or the stockings and jewelry that made certain girls look more refined. But she had a way of smiling and tilting her head to the side, and some kind of simpatico outsider way of looking at the world that appealed to a young man like George, who felt life had never cut him a fair deal. She had graduated from high school and was doing the common and necessary job of cleaning white people's homes. But with George up in Tallahassee around those well-turned-out co-eds training to be teachers, she fixated on her deficiencies. She imagined her competition in high heels and straight hair, their dignified talk turning George's head. She convinced herself he would choose one of them over her, and told him as much. Big George didn't want Inez around his son, either. She was from the backwoods, and in the pecking order that emerged even on the lowest rung, people with house notes versus people who paid rent, factory workers versus servants, Big George saw Inez as lower than the Starlings. During spring break of his sophomore year, the subject of school came up again. George asked his father if he would send him back, and again the answer was no. George was incensed and decided to do something about it. It was April 19th, 1939. He took his father's car and drove up to the house where Inez lived. "Come on, let's take a ride," he said. "What you doing?" "Come on, let's ride." "Well, where you going?" "Oh, just a ride." She hopped in, and he drove south for 5 miles to Tavares, the county seat. He drove around to the back of the courthouse, where the jail was, and slowed to a stop. "Where are you going?" Inez asked, alarmed now. He grabbed her hand. "Come on, I want to show you something." He led her upstairs and into the magistrate's office. "Well, what can I do for you, boy?" the magistrate said. "We come to get married," George said. Inez nearly fainted. She looked to George to explain himself. "Well, you've been pressuring me about getting married. You're telling me that I'm going to end up marrying one of those college girls that's getting a schoolteacher's education, and you're not going to be good enough for me. And I keep telling you that that wouldn't make any difference. But you can't seem to believe that, and you don't want to wait. I wanted to show you that you're the only one that I wanted, so we just going to get married now." Inez stood there with her mouth open. I didn't know," was all she could manage. She was wearing whatever dress she happened to put on that morning, and he had on whatever he'd thrown on, too. "Now, you know that'll cost you $1.50, boy," the county judge, A.S. Herlong, said. $1 for the license, 50 cents for a witness." "Yes, sir." The judge went through the vows and declared them man and wife. She was 21, he was 20, and not legally old enough to marry. "I told the man I was 21, George later said. "They didn't care. If you black, they don't care nothing about Negroes. They didn't check it out. I would be 21 in a couple of months. But anyway, we got married." As they drove back to Eustis, George told Inez his plan. "You gon' have to continue to stay with your people. We got to keep this secret until I find out whether I'm going back to school or not." George left out a crucial bit of information in what he told Inez. although it wouldn't take her long to figure it out. I didn't tell her my ulterior motive, he said years later. Now, in all fairness, he said, I was in love with her, but I didn't have no intention of getting married, not at that stage, until I got mad with my daddy. He didn't even want me to be courting this girl, much less talking about marrying her. So I figured that would fix him up good, 'cause he won't send me back to school, he said. I got in all that trouble for $1.50. George hadn't really thought his revenge scheme through to completion. He held out hope that his father would change his mind. George would spring the news about Inez on him only if his father didn't come around. The two of them kept their secret through the spring and into the summer, when George went to New York, like a lot of college students from the South, to make spending money for school. He worked at a dry cleaner's in Flatbush and lived with the aunts who had sent money to his grandmother, the root doctor in Ocala. Toward the end of the summer, he wrote his father, I have my money for my books and everything. I bought what clothing I'll need. Are you going to be able to pay my tuition? Little George didn't know it, but the people back home had been grumbling in Big George's ear. The father had already done more than he had to. Nobody else was spending all that money for school. None of them had gone off to college, and they had made out all right. Their kids were working in the groves and bringing in good money. What was little George doing? His father wrote him back, No, I just won't be able to do it. You have to work this year, and we'll see how things are next year. The summer was almost over. The semester would be starting soon. George had run out of time. He realized his dream was over. He wrote his father again. He wanted to get back at him now. Well, that's all right. Don't worry about it, because I'm married anyhow. I'm married to Inez. George waited for the fireworks, but they never came. He caught the bus back home, and the old people who hadn't seen him in months recognized him as he walked from the bus station. They called out to him from their front porches. Hey, ain't that little George, Starling? Yes, ma'am, this is me. Come here, boy. Lord have mercy, what is wrong with you? You done gone plumb fool. They tell me you done jumped up and married that Cunningham girl, and your daddy said he was here getting ready to send you back to school. George couldn't speak. The old people went on. 'Cause your daddy said he was getting ready to send you back to school, and before he know anything, you come writing him about you done got married. The word had spread all across Egypt town, and everybody knew about the ingrate son who had ruined his chance at college, marrying some girl from the wrong side of town. Dog, the old man done tricked me, George thought to himself. He knew how they talked, and in the old people's sweet scolding, he could hear how the story got repackaged in the telling. People in town with nothing better to do, who never had the chance at college themselves, maybe never tried or even wanted to go, delighting in the confusion and goading Big George over it. George, where is that boy? Is he going to school? No. You know what that devilish boy done? I'm here getting ready to send him back to school, and here he come writing me the other day telling me about he married. Well, I declare, you mean to tell. Now, I know that boy ain't done nothing like that, and hard as you working, trying to send him to school. And so it went. If the father had ever intended on sending him back, he now had a publicly acceptable excuse for not doing so, and he had come out the hero in the deal. As for little George, no colleges near Eustis, nor any state universities in Florida, for that matter, admitted colored students. The closest colored colleges were hours away. He had a wife to support now, so he would have to do precisely what his father had intended all along. It looked as if he might never make it back to school, and he would have to live with vows made in anger for the rest of his life. It would not be happy, because he knew, and she knew, how it had come to be. But they would both try to make the best of it, now that the deed was done. Robert Joseph Persing Foster, Los Angeles, 1996. The paneled door rises a story high and would befit a museum or government office, but is actually the front door of a Spanish revival south of Wilshire. The door opens, and there stands a one-time bourbon-swilling army captain and deft-handed surgeon who now, in his later years, is a regular at the blackjack tables and the trifectas at Santa Anita. But he is at the heart of it all, and perhaps most important, a long-standing, still bitter, and somewhat obsessive expatriate from the 20th century South, the heartbreak Jim Crow land he chose to reject before it could reject him again. He is a Californian now, this Robert Joseph Persing Foster. He is the color of strong coffee and has waves in his hair, which he lets grow as untamed as Einstein's, but then brushes back like the boys in the band. He's wearing a white cotton island shirt, loose slacks and sandals, the uniform of the well-to-do L.A. pensioner. He has the build and bearing of a Sammy Davis Jr., and not a little of the showmanship and delightful superficiality that seem to grow on people in certain circles of L.A. He walks straight-backed and slew-footed into the foyer, past the curved, faux, gone-with-the-wind staircase and the East Asian pottery. He gestures toward the living room, an imposing museum of a space that dwarfs him in its volume, fairly frozen in the seafoam carpet and hot pink tulip chairs out of a sherbety Doris Day movie from the 50s. The whole effect is as starched and formal as the tuxedos he used to wear to the parties he threw for himself back when his wife Alice was alive and the money was raining down like confetti. He seems accustomed to people fawning over the place, and with the prim air of leading men of his favorite movies from back in the 40s, insists on serving his guests a slice of lemon pound cake and vanilla ice cream on Rosenthal china, whether they would like to have it or not. His heavy-lidded eyes look straight into those of his listener, and have a distractingly thick fringe of lashes, like those seen on babies and starlets. He is a physician, or was for most of his adult life, and by most accounts a very good one, and is prone to pontificate like a man of his years and accomplishments. But he is just as likely to interrupt himself and check the time to see if he can still make the 1 o'clock at the Hollywood Park racetrack. His photo albums are filled with an unlikely assortment of bookies and blues singers, and dentists and fraternity men, and surgeons and society people, whose approval he craved, even though he knew they were too pretentious to matter, really. He doesn't say it because it would be gauche and hardly worth mentioning from his point of view, but there happen to be a lot of little Roberts around town, due to the fact that over the years he delivered a number of baby boys whose mothers were so grateful for his firm hand and calming reassurances at the precise moment of truth that they named their sons not after their husbands, but after the doctor who delivered their babies. Before he begins his story, he tells you it's a long one and you can't get it all. He's lived too many lives, done too much, known too many people, ridden so high and so low, that there's no point in fooling yourself into thinking you can capture the whole of it. You could try, of course, and he agrees to give as much as he can. "I love to talk," he says, a smile forming on his still chiseled face as he sits upright in his tulip chair. "And I am my favorite subject." Monroe, Louisiana, 1933. It was a Saturday. Persing Foster, the teenage son of ambitious but barely paid schoolteachers, began to stir in the thin light of morning. He lived across the railroad tracks from the rest of Monroe, in the worn, colored section mockingly known as Newtown, despite its dirt roads and old shotgun houses on stilts. He pulled out his good pants with the 3-inch waistband and the buttons on the side. A few hours from now, the Paramount Theater would go dark, and Jean Harlow or Errol Flynn or some other airbrushed and porcelain movie star would appear out of nowhere, big as a building. Pershing wanted to be there when the curtain went up and escape his segregated cell of a life, if only for 94 minutes. But his father reminded him he couldn't leave just yet. The cows had to be brought in from the grazing pasture and milked before he could go. Morning after morning, his father had tried to teach him how to milk. Each time, Pershing bent down and pulled hard on the teats, but he could never get the hang of it, nor, truth be told, really wanted to. One time, the cow kicked over the bucket, and the milk spilled everywhere, which only proved to Pershing, who didn't want to be there in the first place, that he wasn't cut out for this line of work. "I told you that cow didn't like me," Pershing said. His father couldn't afford to lose a whole bucket of milk. Madison Foster was the principal of the colored high school, a misnomer because it included every grade from the 1st through the 11th, but in any case, paid him a fraction of what the state openly and unapologetically paid his white counterparts, and left him and his family only slightly better off than the colored servants in town. He needed that milk to supplement his wages, and he didn't have milk to waste. "Let him go," his father finally conceded to his wife, Audie. "Unloose him. Unloose him." Pershing got his way. He was the last child Audie would ever bear, and to the degree that a colored child could be spoiled when so much of the world was cut off to him, he was. There were 3 children above him. Madison was the oldest and away most of the time, off in medical school. He was going to be the first doctor in the family, as Audie, who set her sights higher than the teacher that she was, liked to say of her firstborn. Leland, the second son, was a star pitcher at Morehouse College in Atlanta. His parents had big plans for Leland, naming him as they did after their alma mater, Leland College in New Orleans. People were saying Leland had a shot at the Negro Leagues. He had to fight the girls off him as it was. He had a sculpted mahogany face and waves in his hair. He had the best mind of all the 4 children, but to his mother's great sorrow was a regular at the pool hall and the juke joints, despite her best efforts. The women called him Woo, which is what they whispered when they saw him. There was a sister named Emlyn. They called her Gold, owing to the sunset cast to her skin, and her place as the only surviving girl. Her twin, Evelyn, had died as an infant. Everybody fussed over Gold and told her how beautiful she was, which she was. The table seemed set before Pershing was ever born, and he couldn't see how to stand out on his own or figure out how he fit in as the youngest. A few years before, when he was about 10, he hit upon something that he thought he could do. He was in 5th grade, and when the school bell rang, he ran to meet his mother in her 7th grade classroom. He told her his discovery as they walked home together. "Mama, I believe I can play the piano." "You think you can?" "Yes, Mama, I know I can." "What makes you know?" "Mama, all you got to do is do like this," he said, banging his fingers on an invisible keyboard as he walked, "and hum the song, and it'll come out." "You think so, baby?" "Yes, Mama." "Well, tomorrow after school you go down and you try it on the piano and you let me know how you come out." The next day, he did as she said. Noise came out of the piano instead of the music in his head, and that was the end of his short career as a pianist. He never spoke of it again, and seeing that he didn't bring it up, neither did his mother. The day the cow kicked over the bucket, they let Pershing have his way. He was a teenager now, and off to the Paramount. It sat gaudy and beautiful on the other side of the Missouri Pacific Railway tracks from the colored section of town. He stepped out of the white frame bungalow with his pants creased to a knife edge, the crinkled waves in his hair pomaded and patted down, and proceeded down the dirt roads leading downtown. He went past the little plank houses that stood on cinder blocks due to the rains and floods, and jumped over the dirt ditches that made grass islands of every yard around. He picked up paper shell pecans that fell in people's yards, like litter. Soon he came to the places where the white people lived. The streets were paved and smooth now. In Newtown, the roads were earthen humps with a ditch on either side to catch the bayou when it ran out of places to go. Whenever it rained, the streets turned to mud, and Persing and the other children jumped in the ditches and splashed around as if the ditches were a swimming pool. They didn't know what a real pool was like, because the only one in town didn't allow children who looked like them. Trucks rumbled down the road and flung dust on the porches and through the screens and into the front rooms of the houses on Persing's side of town. The mud and dust were an affront to Persing, and he defied it the best he could. He made a game out of proving he could outwit his lower caste world. It was my personal pride to wait till a rainy day and polish my black and white shoes, he said, and wear them when the rain had stopped and jump over puddles and not get a spot of anything on them. Those dirt roads were the reason he never learned to skate, and he could never forget that. We could buy skates, Persing would remember even as an old man, but we couldn't buy sidewalks. Downtown was called 5 Points, the intersection of 18th and Dessert, and when Persing got there, he walked further down Dessert Street past Piccadilly's restaurant, where the white people ate, and on to the Paramount straight ahead. He could see the double glass doors in front and a crowd forming outside. He knew to ignore the front entrance. It was off limits to people like him. He went to get his ticket. It was a more complicated affair than it had to be, owing to the whims and peculiarities of how Jim Crow played out in a particular town or establishment. For a time, there was a single ticket agent working both booths, the window for the colored and the one for the white. The agent swiveled between the two openings to sell the movie tickets, a roll to the white line, and then a pivot to the colored. It created unnecessary confusion and waiting time for one line or the other, the waiting borne more likely by the colored moviegoers than the white, as waiting to be served after colored people would have been unacceptable to the white clientele. By the time Persing was nearly grown, the swiveling ticket agent was dispensed with in favor of altogether separate windows and ticket sellers, which would cost a little more, but would move the white and colored lines along more quickly, and was more in keeping with the usual protocols of Jim Crow. The Paramount fancied itself like one of the great opera houses of Europe, with its crimson velvet curtains and pipe organ rising from the orchestra pit. A double wide staircase ushered theatergoers to its box seats. But Persing would not be permitted near them. He followed the colored crowd to the little door at the side entrance, while the white people passed through the heavy glass doors on Dessert. He saw Jimmy and Clarence and Nimrod and just about every other kid from Newtown on his way in. The side door opened onto a dark stairway. Persing mounted the steps, anxious to get a seat before the lights went dim. He went up 1 flight, 2 flights, 3, 4, 5 flights of stairs. The scent of urine told him he was getting closer to the colored seats. At the top of the stairs, there was Benny Anderson, the colored ticket taker, ready to take his stub. The urine aroma was thick and heavy now. The toilet was stopped up most of the time, and the people did what they had to. Some relieved themselves on the way up. Persing thought they did it on purpose, a protest, maybe, for the condition of the place, not registering that it was other colored people who had to suffer for it. He could understand it, but he didn't much approve. Persing sat hard in the wooden seat and tried not to notice the stuffed upholstery on the main floor below. Sometimes the kids would rain popcorn and soda pop on the white people. At last, the place went dark, and Persing left Monroe. He was on a bright veranda with Myrna Loy and Tyrone Power out in California. It was a perfect world, and he could see himself in it. The only way that someone as proud and particular as Persing could survive in the time and place he was in was to put his mind somewhere else. He grew up watching his parents exercise exquisite control over the few things they were permitted to preside over in life. Their domain was the Monroe Colored High School, where Madison was principal and Audie taught 7th grade. It was a small brick building with 1,139 pupils and a teacher for each grade, from kindergarten to 11th, and run with the precision of a military institution. Madison James Foster was a short man, partial to vested suits and Bible scripture. He had had a hard, orphan-like childhood, which he kept to himself, other than to say that he had been raised not by his parents, but by white people in New Iberia, down by the Gulf. As a boy in the 1880s, he showed a gift for reciting verse, and his white guardians had him perform for their guests as parlor entertainment. There he stood in the middle of a Victorian front room, white guests gathered around him, and was told to recite scripture for their amusement. They saw that he had a facile mind, and when the time came, offered him some assistance to get a degree. He landed at an old colored school called Leland College in New Orleans, where he met a preacher's daughter named Audie. They graduated from Leland in 1905 and married the same year. They had big plans for themselves, just as Jim Crow was closing doors on them. They set out to teach far from New Orleans, in a moated land of cotton gins and oak trees, dripping plant feathers between the Ouachita River and the bayou. An opportunity had arisen in Monroe, an old mill town near the upper brim of the Louisiana Butte, not far from where the shoelaces would be. Monroe was 3 counties west of Mississippi, 75 miles from Vicksburg. It was closer to the cotton fields of the Delta than the bon temps, rolling high life of New Orleans, where the two of them had met. To the north was the tenant-farming Ozark land of warm springs and hard living in Arkansas, where an attempt by sharecroppers to unionize in the town of Elaine would be crushed with bloody efficiency in 1919. To the west was Texas, the wide-open grazing and cotton land of vigilante justice and lynching spectacles that drew people by the thousands and made the newspapers all over the country. In the midst of this violence, Monroe was a quietly hierarchical town with its 2 castes remaining in their places and separated by 2 sets of railroad tracks. The town had been founded by French traders in the 19th century and became a mill town serving the nearby cotton plantations and lumber concerns by the time the Fosters got there. The town came into its own in the 1920s with the arrival of a crop dusting outfit out of Macon, Georgia, the company having decided to move to the more strategically located town of Monroe, closer to the Mississippi Delta. In 1928, a businessman named C.E. Woolman purchased what was then known as Huff DeLand Dusters. He switched from crop dusting and began running the first passenger flights between Mississippi and Texas via Monroe and Shreveport in 1929. The company would later come to be known as Delta Airlines, named after the region it originally served. Delta's presence in Monroe was little more than a distant point of pride to the colored people there, as they could not have become pilots, stewardesses, or gate agents for the airline, and might glean only the ancillary benefits of cleaning the airport and serving the now wealthier and well-positioned white people working there. Delta would remain headquartered in Monroe until 1941, when it relocated to Atlanta with the United States' entry into World War II. It was in Monroe that Madison and Audie Foster spent their honeymoon, hoping to prosper despite the limits of their era, a time when Jim Crow was closing in on them and mutating all over the South. Madison took a position as principal, and she as a teacher of the colored children who spilled out of the shotgun houses on the colored side of the Kansas City Southern and Union Pacific Railroad tracks. They eventually bought a white frame bungalow on Louisiana Avenue, surrounded by icemen, barbers, sawmill workers, and domestics. The colored people took to calling the husband Professor Foster, out of an overinflated respect for his bachelor's degree and the position he held over them. It came out Fessa Foster, though, by the time people got through saying it. He cut a tight-buttoned bearing in his Kuppenheimer suits and arrow shirts with detachable white collars and cufflinks, always gold cufflinks. By the late 20s, he was in a position of some prestige among colored people in town, the president of the Louisiana Colored Teachers Association, and was regularly mentioned in the Louisiana News section of the Chicago Defender for attending or speaking at some important colored meeting or convention. He rose early to open his school and greeted the people on their porches as he passed. He had authority of some sort over practically every child in Newtown. Some Sundays he preached at Zion Traveler Baptist Church. It was a world unto itself. The striving colored people in town, stooped and trodden the rest of the week, invested their very beings into the church, and quarreled over how things should be run and who should be in charge of the one thing they had total control over. In the summer of 1932, the church actually split into two rival factions as to who should be the pastor. One side was backing the Reverend W. W. Hill, an old-school preacher who had just been ousted. The other was supporting Professor Foster, a starched man with a standoffish wife and brilliant children, whom some people saw as having enough influence as it was, seeing as how he already ran the school. The church grew so divided that people were no longer speaking. Enemy lines were drawn. The church had to shut down for 2 whole months. The authorities in Monroe took away the keys. The church reopened the first Sunday in September 1932, along with the wounds and hostilities that were no closer to healing than the day the church was shuttered. That morning, Sunday school had barely begun, when there arose a contention between the two factions as to who was in charge of the church, the Chicago Defender reported. There was a question as to whether the apparent victor, Professor Foster, should speak, the Hill people saying it was perhaps best that he not, the anti-Hill faction urging him to go forward. Professor Foster was accustomed to running things. He arose and stood, stiff and pious, and was reading Bible scripture, when 4 women walked up to the pulpit and demanded he stop preaching, as if to suggest he had no right to be taking over as he had. It was an outrageous, unheard-of disruption, practically blasphemous, and the church broke into an uproar. Several men rushed the pulpit and began fighting. A deacon backed out of the door, hitting back at those who pursued him and falling down in the street. A parishioner named James Dugans, who was either a supporter of Professor Foster or merely enraged at the show of disrespect, picked up a chair, drew a pistol, and started shooting. A bullet struck a woman named Patsy Daniels in the stomach. Incensed, her father ran to a house next door and got a pistol of his own. The father came back to a fight that had now spilled out to the front of the church. When the first gunman, Dugans, saw the woman's now armed father, he shot him in the chest. The bleeding father continued firing as he fell, killing Dugans and wounding 3 other parishioners. Patsy Daniels died from her wounds. In all, as many as 7 people were left wounded, including the dead woman's father. Professor Foster and his family managed to escape unharmed, physically in any case. The Monroe police again had to take the keys of the church. Until the congregation could settle its dispute, the doors of the church were securely nailed up, the Atlanta Daily World reported. Persing was 13. He would now end up seeing the world as a beleaguered and unappreciated Foster, a member of a resented clan in a small clannish subculture inside a segregated pressure cooker of a life. The incident was so unseemly and beneath him that he never spoke of it. But he carried the sense of betrayal and insecurity with him, and in some ways would spend the rest of his life both running from those who rejected his family and craving their acceptance. After the melee, neither Reverend Hill nor Professor Foster would ever muster the full support of the congregation or get to run Zion Traveler Baptist Church. In time, life somehow returned to some version of normalcy, and Professor Foster instead took comfort in his place as the leading black educator in town. On school mornings, he stood at the front steps of the school with a pocket watch in one hand and a paddle in the other. Sometimes the students came running across the schoolyard late and out of breath. "The train's cut us off, Professor Foster," the children would tell him. "I'm going to cut you off," he'd say, raising his paddle. "Get up early, get up early." He held chapel before class started, quoting the Old Testament in the auditorium for an hour every morning, and he believed in sparing neither the rod, paddle, or switch. He half waited for some child to get out of line so he could make an example out of him, but as anybody who grew up in that world could tell you, he was no better or no worse than any colored schoolmaster in the South when it came to such things. His wife, Audie Alberta Wright Foster, was a prim and ambitious woman who made the society pages of the colored papers as president of the Golden Seal Embroidery Club, and for hosting such things as a wedding breakfast for a bridal party in what the Defender called a lovely home prettily decorated for the occasion. Audie was raised in New Orleans, a magic circus of a place compared to Monroe, braided with openly mixed-race Creole people and their patois and jambalaya. She brought the food and ways with her and spent hours on the roux for her gumbo when things were good. To be reputed to be Creole was enough to make her exotic to some colored people, whether she was actually Creole or not, which no one ever established for sure, but most assumed was true. She was a small woman, with skin the color of chestnuts and wavy black hair. It was said she would have been considered quite a beauty if it weren't for the tight bun she wore low on her head, with the severe center part at her forehead, and the fact that she seemed rarely to smile at anyone other than her children. All of the children were bright, but in the family hierarchy, there was not much Pershing could do to distinguish himself, with one big brother off in medical school and another a star athlete. He played softball with the neighborhood kids, where they used broomsticks for bats, and made their own rules because nobody had seen an official baseball game. But he wasn't especially good at it. Pershing looked for a way to prove himself. There were 3 fig trees in their yard, and he picked the figs and sold them to the neighbors, 35 cents for a gallon bucket. He gave them a broad smile and charmed them into believing they needed the figs for breakfast or for preserves or to can for the coming winter. He practiced smiling in the mirror and writing with his left hand, even though he didn't need to. He lived for the pat on the head from his father, but especially his mother for washing out the wash tub or any little thing that he did. He took to cleaning the house to make them happy and to keep the compliments coming, but it only felt good as long as he did it before they could ask. He was crushed whenever he fell short. His parents punished him by making him go to the back steps and sit there. He sat hugging his dog and cried. Sometimes his mother got tired of him sitting on the steps and called him in. Otherwise, he couldn't leave until his father said so. "All right," Professor Foster would say. "Come back in." It was true he couldn't milk a cow, but he didn't mind churning. He churned the milk as it soured and clabbered. Audie skimmed the butter off, and he proceeded to go door to door, selling the butter and the buttermilk in a lard bucket, with a cultivated earnestness and the crisp airs he was beginning to master. "Mrs. Poe, don't you want to buy some milk from me? Can I start bringing you milk on Thursdays?" He found that he could get people to like him, and that if people liked him, he could get what he wanted. For each grade, there was one teacher, and when Persing got to the 7th grade, Mama taught him. She stood at the front of the room and drilled math and verse into him and the rest of the class without humor or partiality. Sometimes Persing got restless and leaned over to talk to Moses Potter or Nimrod Sherman or maybe Jimmy Peters. When he did, Audie stopped in the middle of the lesson and glared down hard at him. "Persing, be quiet." She stood by the blackboard and waited. "Persing, be quiet." He didn't hear her, engrossed as he was. She marched over to his desk. He felt her shadow looming over him and continued to talk. She raised her left hand and smacked him in front of the class. The other children laughed and laughed. Persing put his head down and knew not to test Mama any more. He could get away with less with his mother than with any other teacher in the school. It seemed to him that for every good thing about being the teacher and principal's son, there was a bad thing to it. If he was caught running down the street, somebody would stick her head out the window and remind him who he was. "Boy, get on out the street. I'ma tell Miss Foster on you." To further complicate his life, the Fosters were bookish, small-boned people, and the children of the sawmill hands towered over Persing. The days when he didn't walk home with Mama, when he was alone on the streets of Newtown, some of the boys lay in wait for him. They surrounded him and taunted him for the way he carried himself and the half-inch of extra privilege he had over them. "You think you somebody 'cause you Fessor Foster's boy. You think you better than anybody else 'cause you a Foster." They made a circle around him and felt bigger because of it. If Professor Foster had whipped the boys with his strap that day, Persing paid for it that afternoon. They beat him and had a good time doing it. He took it because he had to, and fighting wasn't in him. Telling his father would have made things worse. Professor Foster knew no other way to keep errant children in line and would have beat the boys again if he knew what they'd done to his youngest boy, which would have only made life harder for Persing. So he kept it to himself. As Persing got to be a teenager, he started venturing out into the neighborhood, poking his head into the juke joints and the pool hall where the hip cats drank late into the night. It was where the men slapped Woo on the back as they poured him another shot of whiskey. But whenever Persing poked his head inside, he got the same wave of the hand from the proprietor and the men lining the wall. "Boy, get out of here. You ain't got no business in here. Fessor Foster wouldn't want you in here." Woo wouldn't have minded, and never told him not to come in. But the word had spread somehow that Professor Foster and his wife had a different life in mind for Persing. There were pressures coming at him from every direction. His high-minded parents, trying to make up in a single generation all that they had been denied through generations of slavery, bullying kids who taunted him and resented his station, tentative though it was. Neighborhood people watching his every move. Then there were the reminders that no matter what he did or how smart he might be, he would always be seen as inferior to the lowliest person in the ruling caste, which only meant he had to work even harder to prove the system wrong, because it had been drilled into him that he had to be better than the system construed him to be. He lived under the accumulated weight of all these expectations. "People in the town demanded more of us," he said years later, "and we had to give it. I respected what they told me, and anything I didn't want them to see, I kept it out of their sight." Every few years, a teacher from Monroe-Colored High loaded a band of students onto the flatbed of a pickup truck and rattled across the Missouri Pacific Railway tracks. They passed the rich people's porticos and pulled up to the back entrance of the white high school in town. The boys jumped out and began stacking the truck bed with the books the white school was throwing away. That is how Monroe-Colored High School got its books. The boys loaded the truck with old geography and English texts, some without covers and with pages torn out and love notes scrawled in the margins, and headed back to their side of town. By the time he was old enough to understand where the books came from, Persing was fast putting together the pieces of the world he lived in. He knew there was a dividing line, but it was hitting him in the face now. He was showing a talent for science and was getting to the point that he needed reference books to do his lesson. But it was against the law for colored people to go to the public library. And the library at the colored high school did not live up to its name, he said years later. He was in the 8th grade when word filtered to his side of the tracks that Monroe was getting a new high school. It wouldn't replace the old building that Monroe Colored High was in. It was for the white students, who already had a big school. It would be called Neville High.
Context of White Supremacy. The number to dial is 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. The number again, 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. For folks out, if you don't want to use your phone, if you're on the Black Talk Radio page, you can click the link. Should be right there for the flash phone if you want to dial in. If you're not there or if you get confused, you can just use the URL, which is tiny, tiny.cc/1race, and that is the number 1. tiny.cc/1race. Once you do that, there's a blue button, actually 3 buttons, but you want the first blue button on the left of the page. It will say flash phone. Click that. Will open a small window. You will see 3 lines. Top line for the phone number, just click it. It should be there, 760-569-7676. Second line is for the code, which is 564-943. You can leave the last line blank, or you can put in a handle or what have you. When you're done, just click the green button at the bottom of the page. It will connect you to the program. You can listen, you can participate. Should work fine. Same procedure. Press star 6 if you want to talk. You'll hear an audio prompt. Press 1 and it'll put your hand up. You can get on the line. We will go ahead and get started. I will reserve comment until folks have chimed in. If you are listening and want to participate, again, just press star 6. Let's see. We should have Mr. Demery 4, S. Dot, and I'm not sure. Caller 3539. You 3 should be with us. I'll get other lines as I see them.
Good evening. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
The first thing that stands out to me, other than the fact that hearing this text makes a lot of things that I see what go on in contemporary times, it seems you could see what the genesis of a lot of that stuff is. But what was interesting to me was particularly when they closed the doors of the church. And this has been a long tradition in Black people with this desire to have this acceptance in the church tradition of white supremacists. And I was speaking to a Black person recently who said to me, we're all new creatures in Christ, right? So I said, okay, I understand and I respect that's your theological belief. But then I asked the individual, I said, one of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan classified as Christians, and didn't they burn crosses on the lawns of those that they terrorized and hang them from trees? And this person got really angry and upset that I pointed out some irrefutable evidence that this particular belief system has been to the peril of a lot of black people for generations. But I thought it was particularly interesting how they pointed out that that was the punishment that they doled out to them, and also how the black male was put on display to quote chapter and verse in front of the house guest in their parlor, as if he was, you know, I don't know, some kind of minstrel or something. But that was what stood out to me the most.
Mm-hmm.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Peace, Gus, and all the other listeners. I too took notes on all this talk of religion. It's a reoccurring thing. But the first thing that I took note on is when it was speaking of the female who said she would never join a church again if she got free. It made me think of religion being like a place of imprisonment or a place of like slavery or something. And then as I thought more on it, as I pondered on it, I was thinking, in a sense, it is because it sort of enslaves or locks up your mind. It's something that stays on your mind. Like even when I was a Christian, I remember people used to have these what would Jesus do bracelets or whatever, and that's supposed to like keep Jesus on your mind all the time. Like when you're about to make a choice or a decision, what would Jesus do? And so I just felt like religion it sort of does lock up or enslave your mind. It's always on your mind. And then I also took note of how they were, with the whole locking up of the church that Esdot mentioned, how they were squabbling amongst each other and how people were injured and killed, like, right outside the church. And I was just thinking, like, even that, like, I don't know, it's just, you would think, church would be somewhere where all of that doesn't occur, but even still now, things like that occur at the church, at funerals and things like that. I believe the guest, I believe his name was Malik, was talking about how someone shot up a funeral or something like that, and I was thinking that kind of thing happens all the time, even being in such a quote-unquote religious place. The talk of the white and colored lines and the separate entrances as far as the movie theater, it kind of made me think back to last week and how I was talking about non-white people paid the same, if not more, admission for a worse condition, because he was talking about how the seats were hard and wooden in the quote-unquote colored section, and how the seats were comfy and cushioned in the white section, and then how the colored section, of course, was like the nosebleed view, and the white section had like the good seats. So just thinking of how it was, like really how it still is, because we pay the same, but we don't always get the same treatment, of course. What else? Oh, and then going back to the church thing, she kept saying, or the reader of the book kept saying, as reported in Chicago, as reported in Atlanta. So I think she said this was in 1932. But just the fact that this killing and the wounding and all that going on in the church was reported nationwide, that stuck out to me as well. White people love that kind of thing. And then the last thing is when they were talking about, I believe, Persing's father being a principal and his mother being his 7th grade teacher, and said something about because of who he was, a foster, people reminded him of who he was, like if he was in the streets or, they just basically pointed out who he was. And I don't know, it made me think of how, I I don't know how I made this correlation, but I was thinking of how we should teach our children African history. A lot of people say what we did doesn't matter if we're not doing anything now, but I feel like if you teach them their history or tell them where they came from, they'll have a sense of belonging. The word people use is Sankofa, which is basically go back and fetch it. So you're, in a sense, reminding them who they are or who they were. And I feel like that builds self-esteem because most non-white children don't know our history or the history of our ancestors besides them being enslaved. But that's all.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, the first thing that I took some notes on was there seemed to be some jealousy between Little George's father, Big George, and himself, I think originating from Big George because he didn't have an opportunity to further his education like Little George was being afforded the opportunity. And Little George married for the wrong reason. The book said he loved her, but he actually married the young lady to get back at his father for not sending him back to school. Also, I made note, it only costs $1.50 to get married. This was around 1939, and $1.50 to get married, probably thousands to get divorced. But also learned a new word, certificate, which it spoke about George's, I guess, I think early in the book, let's see. No, okay, we had Robert Joseph version. And, well, that's talking in a pompous way or sort of a know-it-all. And the book spoke about mothers naming their sons after the doctor because of his firm hand and his calm assurance. I thought that was noteworthy. Persian's father, Madison, was an interesting character. He was a principal, but he was paid less than his white counterparts, although he had more responsibility. The book described him as being short, so he probably had a Napoleon complex. I made note that the white ticket window was a white window, a colored window. Whites, he had to, I guess, constantly wait on the whites first before he got around to the colored or black people, because it would have been unacceptable to the whites to wait while he waited on the so-called color. And I took note that during that time there was probably no television, although TVs commercially was being sold around the 1930s, but I don't think black people could probably afford. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. I don't think black people probably could afford them until maybe the late 40s or the early 50s. There wasn't but 3 stations at that time anyway, so it wasn't a big loss. But Professor Foster, colored school principal, also tried his hand at preaching which had some disastrous results, it looked like, because they had some commotion in the church. And it turned out a church shooting where some churchgoers were wounded. I don't think anybody was killed, but that was quite a commotion. That's all I have for now. Thank
you. The two people that have not shared your line should be open. I think with that church incident, they did report that at least one person died. I'll look back at the details, but I think her name was a female that was shot. I think she died, and the person, I think the black male that shot her may have also died. I'm gonna go back and check that. But the two people that haven't shared yet, your lines are open as well.
Two people did die.
Greetings, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm listening, and what I'm taking from it is kind of the author is setting up an environment, just giving you family dynamics and also the environment of the town, you know, under and then, you know, under Jim Crow, what it was like. It's kind of, you know, just setting up the environment that he's coming up in, Persing, and you know, being the, you know, and him trying to distinguish himself, you know, having being one of four. One brother, you know, they call him Wu. He's good looking. You know, the sister Gold is good looking. The other, I think, brothers going to school for, you know, to be a doctor. And yeah, a lot of people are going to be able to, you know, identify with that. You know, growing up in a family, and especially if you're the youngest or whatever, and, you know, trying to just, and his dynamic with his parents too. You know how they were saying they had plans for him, and it seems like, you know, the people in the town, they kind of, yeah, they know it, or they think they know it. You know, so they, without even the parents being there, the, you know, people in the town are kind of steering him in a direction also, and he's feeling the pressure. He's like, wow, you know. Yeah, it's just that's an interesting little dynamic, and yeah, I think that's what the author is definitely trying to get us to see how that's playing out. You know, psychologically on the character and everything. So it's yeah, definitely interesting. And I was just thinking, you know, the principal being the main educator of that town, and also being a preacher, you can see how that's going to cause a problem. You know what I'm saying? This is I mean, he you know, people are going to think like, okay, this dude is directing, you know, he's directing the next generation as far as education, and now that's the children, and now, you know, people might say, well, that's control. And then he's directing the spiritual direction of the community or whatever. You know what I'm saying? That's a lot of power, and you know, some people they're not comfortable with that. You know, people wouldn't be comfortable with that. So this, you know, this other guy comes, the other preacher or whatever comes in, and that's all it takes. Well, we can have him. Why do we, you know, when you stay over there with the school, do the schooling, and we'll have this, you know, person be our preacher. And he didn't want to give. It seemed like he didn't give up that position very fast. Like he's still preaching to the point where the people, you know, got up during the service, which is like they were saying, like that's almost blasphemous, unheard of. You get up while the preacher is preaching. Mr. Fuller talks about how people go to church and they have a modicum of respect. They know how things should go down, like all that cursing and stuff that they do on the street. They don't do that in the church because people have a general, they know that's not, this it's like a library. You have a certain amount of respect. So that's heavy right there. I can see exactly how that could turn into a gunfight. Like that's the utmost disrespect. That's a serious threat. You get up during the church or whatever, so people will get appalled and angry, like what, so I could definitely see that. But yeah, I'm enjoying it, and the author is doing a good job of setting the table, I think.
(7892) last 4 digits 7892. You should be with us as well.
Yes, greetings. This is Universal Jones. I also took note about the marriage being $1.50. I thought that was interesting. And then when Demery Ford said the divorce is probably a lot more expensive, that was pretty funny. But she made a quote in there that I found interesting where she said, vows made of anger. And I found that kind of compelling when you compare it to today, and when you see a lot of couples who do decide to get married. Sometimes they get married for the wrong reasons. It seems like this might have been something that has gone on for a long time. So that was one thing I took note of. Another thing that I think might have passed by people, but I found it interesting, and I wonder what other people think, why she put this in the book, when she was talking about the piano incident with the young boy who told his mother, I think I can play the piano, it doesn't look that hard, and she encouraged him to go ahead and try it after school the next day. Then he failed, and then they never talked about it again. So it's like there was no follow-up to further encouragement to have him continue to learn and kind of expand his skill set and his talents. And I found that pretty interesting. And then you look at a lot of younger black children today and the lack of encouragement that we have to do all types of different things just because we don't feel that people actually believe in our abilities. So I found that interesting. So yeah, that's pretty much my observations. Everybody else covered everything else for now.
Just to speak on what you said as far as encouragement, I think that was the reason. I think the author put that in from what I was understanding from that was it was actually lack of encouragement. Like that's not encouragement at all. She didn't have any intentions of wanting. She didn't want to pursue that piano. She's got plans, and the piano ain't a part of that. So because like when a child comes to you and says that they're interested in doing something, I did it many times coming up where I really didn't know what I was talking about. I had the wrong perspective of the thing that I wanted to do. I didn't know exactly what it took. So then that's when parents are supposed to step in and give a realistic view of it. So when he described what it took to play the piano as an adult, you already know that ain't how it go. You don't just, do your fingers or your hands any in that way. You know what I'm saying? So I think it was lack of encouragement that she was kind of trying to point out, that she didn't have any intention of him pursuing that, or else she would have told him, Persing, that's not, that's not what it is. It takes some practice. It's a little bit more skilled than just what you're seeing as a child. You still have a child's mind in this area, and let me tell you what it really is. But the mother didn't do that because she didn't. That's not encouragement. She did that. She didn't do that on purpose. You feel what I'm saying? She has different plans.
Yeah, I can see that. Go ahead.
One of the things two things that stood out to me was about the movie theater and the way she described the staircase leading up to the colored section, how people would urinate and defecate at that stairwell, it kind of reminded me of today, like the housing projects. How if you ever visit a housing project and you go up and down the stairwell, how people just use the bathroom there repeatedly. And it's just that sense of self-hate or self-loathing oneself to such a degree that you're going to make the environment as unattractive and as unlivable for other folks because you hate the fact that you live there or you have to frequent there. You know, that made me think about all the times I would visit people and get in an elevator and there would always be urine in the elevator, and I would always wonder, like, why would somebody urinate in the elevator? They more than likely live in this building and have an apartment where they could have used the bathroom. What's that about? And then the other thing that stood out to me was the young boys who would beat him up because they said, you know, you think you're better than us because you're one of them. And that just reminded me of a young man I spoke to the other day who was 19 years old. And he was just finished his first year of college. And he said that while he was away at school, he couldn't, you know, really relate to being away from the environment that he was used to. And he couldn't wait to get back home. And when he got back home for summer recess, he was like, within like 2.5 weeks, he couldn't wait to go back to school. And he told me he goes back to school in about 2 weeks. But he was like, the whole summer has been people telling him, you think you're better than us now. So when I heard that in the story, that reminded me of, you know, that story that the young man told me. And it just reminded me in general how often we do that to one another when we put our own insecurities and shortcomings on other folks, you know, and it's usually like someone will say, you think you're better than us, but it's really they think that other person is better than them. That's it.
I love those last 2 points, S. That was great.
Thank you.
I think his perspective is on the, you know, urinating in the theater is the author is trying to show us something there too. He said he understood it, but he didn't agree with it. He seen it, you know, he understood why they were doing it. As far as he felt like it was, they were, you know, protesting the conditions. But he not agreeing with it because to me it's kind of showing his moral side, like they're not thinking big picture, or they're not thinking about, you know, morality is being able to think about other than yourself, you know, even with the, you know, thinking about other than yourself, but even the father, you know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, you don't have the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Like, he's not thinking, oh, my son is going to have to deal with these kids when I'm not around, and, you know, I'm abusing them and whatnot, and, you know, that's not even, I mean, it doesn't seem like the father is really realizing that. It goes, I think, as he's developing this character, I think that he's seeing things differently. Like people not thinking, they're not thinking like big picture and things like that. Or they wouldn't be doing the things that they're doing. It's a lot of self-centered type of behavior, childish behavior, like or whatever going on.
That comment about the urinating in the stairwell, it reminded me, Mr. Fuller, he tells a story about they apparently were rioting in the 60s and a black male set a liquor store on fire, protesting racism, and it did burn the liquor store down, and then it proceeded to burn down the rest of the block where all black people lived, and it eventually burned down his grandmother's house, and he had to go rescue her before it burned their house down, which it did. And even a black person died in this. And he said, Mr. Fuller, he was saying that even when we call ourselves striking back against whitey, we just end up harming black people. And that's what the whole stairwell, because he said it was just black people that had to suffer and sit in there with that stench in the theater and walk through it, getting up to the stairs, not white people. I think that is a sad pattern that continues even in 2013. When we cock back to strike a blow, invariably it is not against a white person, it's against another black person.
And even touching on that, when he was saying, he said sometimes they threw their popcorn and drinks or something at the white people below. But even that, I mean, okay, you may throw your popcorn and drinks, but that's stuff you pay for. So even that is like still hurting you.
.4028 should be with us. 4028.
Yes. My phone kind of dropped out, so excuse me if I repeat any point that's already been made. But I was just thinking about black men in that situation in terms of the competition for the church, and how you see this kind of competition for the limelight in a way. You see that a lot in the so-called conscious community, where they're doing something productive or attempting to do something productive, and just as you said, it ends up being a competition, about, who's in the limelight. And what they were saying about, they controlled, that the only thing they had to control, which in that case was the church. They give you one bone to fight over, or one bone period, and you wonder why people are fighting, Men are going to want that opportunity to, express their masculinity, but there's only so many options, or so many roles for people to occupy to be respected as a man without being, without being respected in a negative aspect.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yes. Go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to first say that I'm really enjoying the book. It's well written, and the actress that's doing the voiceover, she's really good in how she's characterizing the different characters in the book. The intonations, really, it's a very well done book. What stood out to me, and I wasn't paying strict attention, doing some housework, but what stood out to me was one of the characters saying something about living in a pressure cooker, and it like really sent off bells, because we do, and we have been, meaning we as in non-white black people, and other non-white people as well, but non-white black people specifically, live in a pressure cooker existence, whether they are aware of it or not. Case in point, Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey has, $1 billion by now, but she was not considered good enough to look at a pocketbook that cost however how much, even though she has all of this money. So since most of us are not living even her lifestyle, 98% of us are experiencing that pressure cooker existence every single moment of our lives, whether we are aware of it or not. And when I heard that pressure cooker, that term, pressure cooker, it also reminded me of a film I saw a long, long time ago. It's a very, very old film made in maybe the 1930s or 40s that starred Boris Karloff. And the name of the film, a black and white film, was named Snake Pit. And Snake Pit was centered in an insane asylum. The conditions were brutal, horrible. The patients were treated horrifically. Karloff served as the director of this insane asylum. And I don't remember how long the film was, but it showed how the patients of the insane asylum were so devalued. They were not seen as human. They were not seen as having any value whatsoever. And this director, Boris Karloff, by the end of the film, it showed that he was the most insane of everyone in that horrible environment. He treated the patients terribly. Also, it reminded me of, in the movie theater, when the black people, the non-white black people, would go upstairs into their environment, and the suspect racist would be downstairs, how the black people would settle into their hard wooden chairs, and on would come this film, and it would lull them into a sense of escapism. They could see beautiful things passing by their eyes, beautiful suspect racists on the silver screen, and for a moment they were able to escape their pressure cooker existence. And so from that, I understand that that's a part of the reason the film industry is as lucrative as it is, because we are still trying to escape that pressure cooker, and it's not working, obviously, because then what do? Because of what we're suffering from without this understanding and awareness of what's going on, we then go and we, like, they did at the church, where they're fighting and shooting. And another caller said that, that happens even to today. And it will continue to happen as long as you have people who do not understand what's going on. During the chattel enslavement, part of our being in contact with the racist, we learned excessive corporal punishment during that period. It has been passed down generation after generation after generation. We still continue it, just as adults, parents, attempted parents during chattel enslavement weren't responsible for their children. So there was an emotional distance there. And they learn, the adults, so-called chronological adults, learn that they did not put much stock in their offspring thriving, because they themselves did not thrive. And they did not believe that anyone else could. And yes, there was some jealousy, some competitiveness there. And so they didn't put forth effort to encourage their own children. So I'm getting a lot out of this book. It is quite powerful when you're able to connect the dots with everything else that's going on under the global system. So from there, I'll mute my line.
I find myself identifying with Persing a bit, and I want to see what happens with Wu, because he seems to be a bit more, he not going with the program. That, like, he's kind of doing his own thing. It seems like Persing is maybe trying to get closer to Wu, wanting to go to the bar and stuff like that, and noticing that his brother really doesn't have a problem with him being there. You know, even if he has to get out, he noticed, and he knows, you know, his brother is not really tripping about it, and that's like a connection right there. You know, it's not his own brother telling him to leave. You know, so you know, with him hustling like he was hustling, was selling the figs and the butter and milk, and I found that smart, and I identified with that too. Like how you have to practice smiling, you know, when you don't really. I mean, and you know, we were encouraged to. Every summer it was something different. Like we were given challenges. One time, Bob would talk about just writing with your left hand. Yeah, that's what we did one summer. And I took it. It's still in my life, you know. Sometimes I'll write with my left hand still, you know what I'm saying? So those types of techniques, and I think they do, you know, does something to the brain. It just puts you in different, gives you a different perspective. So I thought that was cool that he did that. It just was a quick little thing, you know. I think the writer said, you know, even though he didn't have to do that he did that. So you kind of get a picture of how he's thinking.
We are get ready for the second audio segment. Make sure we have ample time to discuss. There are some juicy nuggets coming up. I didn't even really hear most of the first segment, audio segment, when I was putting it together for the program, but I did get to hear some of the second segment. Woo! Pay attention. Quick comment I'll get in. I'll see if anybody has a sentence that they want to drop before we get to the second segment. I am going to need a profanity. I can't clean this up because we need truth, and I just need a profanity. So if anybody is opposed to a foul word, then just go ahead and mute, put your hand over your ears. The section where she was talking about George, when he went through this whole trick to try to get his dad to pay his tuition and the marriage and all that stuff. When he gets back and finds out that his dad was going to pay for him to go to school, or at least that's what they were saying, that his dad was going to pay his tuition, but now he's got married, and so he's messed all that up. When he talks about how the whole town knew about this, and he says, George thought to himself, he knew how they talked, and in the old people's sweet scolding, he could hear how the story got repackaged in the telling. People in the town with nothing better to do, who never had the chance at college themselves, maybe never tried or even wanted to go, delighting in the confusion and goading Big George over it. I thought that was really telling because I made my comment about for Black Love. Just stay tuned for the second segment. But I just thought about that, and a term, I used to hear it all the time. I'm not around black people now, but when I was, the term that I would hear all the time, hating ass niggers. Now, I have never heard anyone call white people hating ass crackers. I've never heard that. Hating ass white people. I've never heard that. I used to hear hating ass niggers on almost an hourly basis when I lived in Atlanta. And I don't know how long that term has been in use amongst black people, but just the fact that you have such a term, and at least, like I said, I don't know if it's still being used, but when I was around black people, I heard it a ton. I think that speaks a lot to this tendency. It is all a product of racism, white supremacy, but that, what he says, delighting in seeing other black people fail, man, that is something. And I don't expect that to disappear. I think that's just going to be here as long as racism, white supremacy exists, unfortunately. I think even being made aware of it might mitigate it to some degree, but I tend to think not, because I think this keeps coming up. We talked about this before with regards to why black businesses do not succeed. But I thought that was real important, and I said in the description, making parallels, similarities between what we're hearing in this book from 100 years ago, 80 years ago, to things that are live and direct 2013. That is one. It sounds like George, maybe they weren't saying the term, or maybe they were, but sounds like there was a lot of hating going on even back then. Sentence, so we can get started. Make sure we have time. Anybody have a sentence left, or are we good?
I would just say a sentence, an example of quote-unquote hating ass niggas would be today's contemporary music, more specifically rap music. It's hating ass nigga music. So I guess that's just a manifestation of that.
I thought it was interesting, the Delta airline piece, how it started out, crop dusting, and then passenger plane, and then became this big airline. It then didn't benefit the black people, but it definitely benefited the white people, jobs, and just raised them up, made them rich. That's it.
I thought it was interesting how the boys would get on the back of the truck and go to the white school and load up the old textbooks. And it seemed like that they especially degraded the textbooks, the ones that they were going to give the colored or non-white people, with covers missing and pages missing out of it, graffiti all on them. And those were the ones that they would give to the colored, so-called colored section.
Hello?
We can hear you.
And I was just in response to what you had said, Gus. I guess the old adage applies, hurt people hurt people. That's
right.
That's the way I boil all, dysfunctional behaviors among black people. It's just expressions of victimization.
Amen. More of that to come. The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration. Isabel Wilkerson, first black female to win a Pulitzer Prize. The folks that are on the line, if you can mute just to keep the quality of the program. If you're not able to do it, I can mute you, and then I'll unmute everybody once the segment concludes. Context of White Supremacy, segment number 2.
The colored people could see it going up when they ventured to the other side of the tracks. It rose up like a castle, 4 stories of brick and concrete, with separate wings and a central tower, looking as if it belonged at Princeton or Yale. It opened in 1931 on 22 acres of land. The city fathers made a fuss over the state-of-the-art laboratories for physics and chemistry, the 2,200-seat balconied auditorium, the expanded library, and the fact that it was costing $664,000 to build. As the new high school took shape across town, Persing watched his father rise in the black of morning to milk the cows and walk the 1.5 miles to open his building, the size of a grade school. His father, his mother, and the other teachers at Monroe Colored High School were working long hours with hand-me-down supplies for a fraction of the pay their white counterparts were getting. In Louisiana in the 1930s, white teachers and principals were making an average salary of $1,165 a year. Colored teachers and principals were making $499 a year, 43% of what the white ones were. Persing's parents could console themselves that they were faring better than colored teachers in other southern states, a reflection not necessarily of their superior performance, but that there were states even worse than Louisiana when it came to teachers' pay. In neighboring Mississippi, white teachers and principals were making $630 a year, while the colored ones were paid a third of that, $215 a year, hardly more than field hands. But knowing that didn't ease the burden of the Fosters' lives, get their children through college, or allow them to build assets to match their status and education. The disparity in pay, reported without apology in the local papers for all to see, would have far-reaching effects. It would mean that even the most promising of colored people, having received next to nothing in material assets from their slave foreparents, had to labor with the knowledge that they were now being underpaid by more than half, that they were so behind it would be all but impossible to accumulate the assets their white counterparts could, and that they would, by definition, have less to leave succeeding generations than similar white families. Multiplied over the generations, it would mean a wealth deficit between the races that would require a miracle windfall or near asceticism on the part of colored families if they were to have any chance of catching up or amassing anything of value. Otherwise, the chasm would continue, as it did for blacks as a group even into the succeeding century. The layers of accumulated assets built up by the better-paid dominant caste, generation after generation, would factor into a wealth disparity of white Americans having an average net worth 10 times that of black Americans by the turn of the 21st century, dampening the economic prospects of the children and grandchildren of both Jim Crow and the Great Migration before they were even born. For now, each day, Persing's parents and the families whose children they taught had to live with the reality that they had to do more with less. Southern states made no pretense as to the lopsided division of resources to white and colored schools, devoting as much as $10 per white student for every dollar spent on a colored student, and showing little interest beyond that meager investment. The money allocated to the colored children is spent on the education of the white children, a local school superintendent in Louisiana said bluntly. We have twice as many colored children of school age as we have white, and we use their money. Colored children are mighty profitable to us. When a fire broke out in the basement of Monroe Colored High School, destroying classroom furniture and equipment, the city refused to so much as replace the desks and teaching supplies that had burned to ashes, as the Monroe News-Star reported. The tax dollars were earmarked for Neville. The colored parents, already strapped, would have to raise the money themselves. That would be just one more thing weighing on Professor Foster. As it was, he wasn't making half of what the Neville High School principal made. Nobody in Newtown would be allowed in the new building when it opened, other than to clean it, and the idea of Persing attending it, no matter how smart he was unthinkable. It was not something the Fosters would have wanted to dwell on, as it would have done them no good, but their very existence, their personal aspirations, and the purpose of their days were in direct opposition to the white ruling class policy on colored education. That is, that colored people needed no education to fulfill their God-given role in the South. If these Negroes become doctors and merchants, or buy their own farms, a Southern woman told the celebrated journalist Ray Stannard Baker, "What shall we do for servants?" The unfairness started to eat at Pershing. It was a curse to be able to see it, better not to know.
This is the end of disc number 3. This is disc number 4.
But the older he got, the more he was starting to want, and the more he wanted, the harder it was to accept that he might never get it, all because of a chemical in his skin that some people resented and felt superior to, and that no one on this earth could change. To make matters worse, he had the misfortune of having developed exquisite taste, and what little he was exposed to only fed his ambitions. Everything you wanted was white and the best, he said. Persing had started to notice the girls, and they started to notice him. They were getting to an age where they would walk home from school together, meet at the Paramount for the picture show, and eventually end up in a park or a field somewhere. Somebody would get a car from an uncle or someone or other, and they would drive up to where the new Neville High was, shiny new and perched high on a hill. It was lush and secluded, and when they had finished with the girls, they whirred past the grounds and flung their spent condoms on the green. "That's how we showed our resentment," he said years later. "Don't think we were blind." Just before dark, when the sky is neither blue nor black but purple, Persing stepped out of the tin tub to get ready for a Saturday night. He put on long pants and cheap cologne and walked in the direction of the Miller and Roy building on the colored side of 5 Points, about a mile from the center of town. It was in the shadow of downtown, in a world of its own. The axis was 18th and Dessert. Across from the office building was the drugstore. Behind the drugstore was a cafe. Behind the cafe was a liquor store. Across from the liquor store was the pool hall. He had his shirt buttoned low and open as he strutted down Dessert. He was 2 blocks from the Miller and Roy building when a car pulled up to the curb. The exhaust spit and coughed. A white man leaned out of the window. "Hey, boy." Pershing kept walking. He hated being called boy, even though he was one. They barked it at the sawmill hands, and at bent-over old colored men, and even upstanding men like his father. He was 14, and it was already beginning to grate on him. "Hey, boy!" Pershing stopped and consoled himself. "You can answer him because you are a boy. You're not 21 yet. Technically, you're still a boy. That makes it okay for him to address you as boy." He turned toward the car and kept it to "yes" instead of "yes, sir." "Boy, I'll pay you if you get me a nice, clean colored girl." Pershing breathed deep. Ever since his sister Gold had hit puberty, he could hardly walk down the street with her without white men with snuff in their mouth yelling out what they would do to her. It made him want to vomit. She kept her head up and held his hand tight and walked through it. He could never defend her, never stand up to a gang of them on a street corner. That was death, he would say years later. Pershing knew it from the sheer insanity all around him. When he was 11 years old, a white mob burned down the courthouse across the border in Sherman, Texas. It started with a colored man accused of raping a white woman, a confession extracted, a trial hastily set. But just as the trial opened, a mob stormed the courtroom and torched the building to get to the defendant, George Hughes. Court officials fled through a second-story window and left Hughes in a steel vault with a bucket of water. Firefighters tried to save the courthouse, but the mob slashed the water hoses to keep the blaze going. The mob then dynamited the vault where Hughes had been left. The mob found him dead, crushed by the explosion, the water bucket almost empty. The courthouse then burned to the ground. Disappointed that they had not gotten to Hughes before he died, the people in the mob hanged his body from a cottonwood tree and set it on fire with furniture they looted from a nearby colored hotel. Then they torched the colored district as the colored people of Sherman fled to the homes of white friends or left town. A half-dozen colored homes escaped the torching only because a white man told the mob the houses belonged to him. This was the world Pershing was growing up in. He had learned the rules early in life. Now he was standing at a vacant curb, just him and a white man out prowling. He had never seen the man before, imagined he must have come in from the country and made a beeline for the colored section with one thing in mind, as was his prerogative. Not just any colored girl. A nice, clean colored girl. The man waited, and Pershing assessed the situation. He was on the colored side of town, a block from the rooming house. He knew every turn and alley. He was in the majority around here. He looked at the man. "A nice, clean colored girl," he said, calculating the risks of what he might say next. "Let me see. I tell you what. You get your mama for me, and I'll get you one." He didn't wait for the man's reaction. Pershing vanished into the colored alleys of 5 Points. He couldn't believe what had come out of his mouth. His face was flushed and his hands shook. He could get hanged for that. Nothing more needed to happen to remind him who had the power over him and what they could do if they wanted. "You lived with it," Persing said years later. But it wasn't that you liked the taste of it. And I'd whisper to myself that someday the sun was going to shine down on me, way up north in Chicago or Kansas City or one of those other faraway places that my cousin always talked about. I felt the same restlessness in me. Mahalia Jackson, Moving On Up. The South, 1915 to the 1970s. At Easter and around the 4th of July, the people from the North came. They looked like extras out of a movie at the Saturday matinee. They wore peplums and bergamot waves. Even the wind moved aside as they walked. They flashed thick rolls of cash from their pockets, the biggest bills on the outside covering the 1s and 5s. They said they were making all kinds of money, but they didn't have to say it because the cars and the clothes did the talking. They'd been wiring more money to their families back home than they truly could spare, and had been saving up all year for those gloves and matching purse. But they weren't telling the people in the South that. They made sure to show up at their mother churches, where everyone would see them, at Gethsemane Baptist Church in Eustis, Florida, where Lil George went, at Thankful Baptist Church in Rome, Georgia, where my mother saw the people visiting from the north, at New Hope Baptist Church in Chickasaw County, Mississippi, where Ida Mae lived. Even at Zion Traveler Baptist Church in Monroe, Louisiana, where Persing grew up, the partisans set aside their rivalries and sat upright in the pews when the people from the north came. The pastor would ask the visitors to rise, and it was then that the people from up north or out west stood up in their butterfly hats and angel dresses and in suits upholstered to the tall men's frames. People who hadn't seen them in ages now craned their necks to see how Willie and Thelma looked, and if they had changed any. And the pastor went on about how this one was building cars in Detroit, and that one was doing us proud in Oakland. They were received like visiting dignitaries. They had once been just like the people who stayed. Now they were doing important-sounding work for the government in Washington, in the hotels on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, in the garment district in New York, or in the apartments of the rich people on Riverside Drive. They wore the protective coating of the North. They lived in big cities, too distracted to care what the colored people did, as long as they did it to themselves, and that was the greatest blessing of all. At night, when the June bugs came out, the children sat at the knees of the people from the North and heard stories of doing unimaginable things, like sitting in the front of a trolley car and saying yes instead of yes, sir, to a white person, and living to tell it. In Grenada, Mississippi, 2 little boys couldn't wait for their big sister Francie to come visit from Ohio. Gilbert and Percy Ellie would crouch at her feet and listen to her. We would sit on the porch in the moonlight, Gilbert remembered, and she would tell us about the North. Then she went back to Ohio, and life returned to the way it was for Gilbert and Percy, living as they were in the altogether different country of the Mississippi Delta. They and Ida Mae and George and Persing and children all over the South were growing up trying to comprehend the caste they were born into, adjusting or resisting, lying in bed at night and imagining a world that was different and free, and knowing it was out there because they had seen it in the casual airs, the haughtiness even, and the clothes and the stories of the people from the North. Now nothing around them made sense, and everything that happened to them imprinted itself into their psyches and loomed larger because they had glimpsed what was possible outside the bars of their own existence. Yet they were too young to escape, so they had to endure their peculiar station in the feudal world they were consigned to, and the madness that could intrude at any given moment. Like the night back in the 1940s, a moon-shining night, bright like it's almost day, when little Gilbert and Percy were sitting on the front porch steps of their family's cabin. The boys could hear voices coming from the woods. The voices echoed through the trees in the night. The boys got quiet and still and tried to make out what was happening. They could hear the crackle of a whip and a hollow wailing coming from the woods. A colored man was being lashed in the pine scrub beyond their cabin. The boys heard the man cry out with each blow. "All right, we gonna take a break," some voices finally said. There was silence. Then the men took up the task again. "We gonna kill you," the voices said from the woods. "Please, please don't," the colored voice said. "Before y'all do, will you let me pray?" The man began to pray. The man prayed a prayer like a Baptist preacher, Gilbert remembered decades later. "I ain't never heard a man pray like that man. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they doing." Gilbert remembered the man praying. "I lived a good life for you. If you never done nothing for me, Lord, please." "All right, that's enough," the other voices said. The man continued to pray. The beating and wailing commenced again. Then the wailing stopped. "The son of a bitch dead," came a voice from the woods. Gilbert could never get the man's cries out of his head. "We don't know who he was," Gilbert said some 50 years later, "or what he was supposed to have done." The seeds of Gilbert's departure from Mississippi were sown that night. More seeds were planted another day, when he and his father and brother were walking home from the movie theater in town. The street was little more than an alley, barely wide enough for two people to walk astride. Gilbert was about 12. He was reading a comic book and not paying attention. 3 white boys, not much older than Gilbert, came in their direction. Gilbert's father and brother instinctively jumped out of the way. Gilbert was looking at his comic book and bumped into one of the boys. The boy grabbed Gilbert by the collar. "Who do you think you are?" Gilbert remembered the boy asking him. The boy spat at him, and Gilbert hit the boy back. Gilbert's father was shaking with fear. He begged forgiveness from the boy who spat on his son. Then he turned to his son and upbraided him. "Boy, what's the matter with you?" his father said. "Are you crazy?" The father fumed at him. All the way home, he didn't talk to me, Gilbert remembered decades later. I got home, he didn't say a word. That night, Gilbert could hear his father confiding to his mother through the cardboard-thin walls of their cabin. "Sugar, that one son we got, Gilbert, I'm afraid for him," the father whispered. "That boy'll never live if he stays in Grenada." Gilbert knew that. He shared his dreams with Percy when they worked in the field, hoeing and plowing and weighing up the cotton. "We would plow side to side," Gilbert remembered. "He'd have a row and I'd have a row. We would talk. We would talk about school or what I'm going to do when I get to be grown when I leave here." His big sister's stories of life up north had seeped into him, and one day when he got big enough, he told himself he was going to follow her to Ohio. And he did. Hundreds of miles away, out in the country near Jackson, North Carolina, a family named Dubrow was in a tizzy whenever Cousin Beulah was expected in from New York. The mother cooked all day. The daughters, Virginia and Lee, cleaned and swept and tried to imagine how she would look. It was as if the Queen of England were coming. Beulah blew into town in the latest silk dresses, her high heels click-clacking on the pavement. Her hair was pressed and shiny and swung when she turned her head. The girls touched it to see how it felt. "If we could just look like that," Virginia told her sister. Virginia started dreaming then and there. "Someday I'm going to New York." She sat and planned the whole thing out with her little brother. She wouldn't have to pick cotton anymore or feel the spike of frost on the wet grass going barefoot to the outhouse in the morning. In the early 1940s, she did in fact join the multitudes. The day she left, her mother made fried chicken and broke down crying. Her father was too hurt to speak. He stayed in the house as they left. "He did not bid us goodbye," she said. She ended up in Brooklyn, where the elevated train shook the apartment and looked as if it were coming straight into the window, and where she would get her hair pressed and wear high heels click-clacking on the pavement like Beulah. Sometimes the young people had little choice but to leave sooner than they had imagined. Such was the case with my mother's older brother. He was a teenager in Rome, Georgia, working as a driver and office boy for an upstanding white man in town during the Depression. He would drive the man from Georgia to Miami for the man's business trips, alone with him in the car for hours at a time. He liked the man because he let him keep the big, new, shiny car after dropping the man off at the White Hotel. It was one of the few company jobs accorded colored teenagers in the South at that time, and was thought to be a good one. One day, he was straightening the man's office when he opened a drawer and saw something white folded inside. He pulled it out and unfurled the fabric. It was a white robe and hood. Trembling, he put it back in the drawer and had to reconsider everything he thought he knew about the man he had trusted and the world in which he lived. That night, he went home and told his parents and his little sisters that he was leaving Georgia for Detroit, one of the receiving stations for people from that part of the South. He had made his decision, was shocked into it, really. He would get a job at Chrysler, like a cousin of theirs. He was joining the Great Migration for the most personal and profound of reasons, and without knowing it, planted a seed in my mother's imagination, knowing as she did why her big brother had fled. Several seeds were planted, too, in Ida Mae, Lil George, and Persing. Ida Mae heard about this one or that one going north to freedom after a lynching or a raw deal at settlement. Her big brothers Sam and Cleve had fled to Toledo. Her big sister Irene was talking about going to Milwaukee, and as Ida Mae came of age, she saw the cloche hats and unobtainable finery of city living in the pages of the Sears Roebuck catalog out of Chicago. Lil George watched the Bly brothers, Babe and Reuben, older boys who'd gone north to New York, come back to Eustis in their zoot suits and fedoras. They talked about all the money they were making, building the 9W highway up in Jersey, about the skyscrapers and streetlights, the dance halls in Harlem, the parties in Corona, and the boulevards paved where the colored people lived. "We used to sit up all night," George remembered, "and listen to Babe and MB and Reuben and Freeman and all of them talking about New York." And I said, "Boy, that sounds just like heaven. I want to see some of that. New York. I'm sure going to New York soon as I get big enough." And in Monroe, Louisiana, if Mantan Moreland passed through town, there was a stir in the pews and talk in the pool hall. Everyone wanted to sit down with the native son who had made it to Hollywood, even if it was only as a shuffling sidekick in the movies. Persing saw the parade of people from the north and the movie scenes at the Paramount of life beyond Louisiana, and began dreaming of escape, too. When he was still small enough to fit in the crawl spaces of the houses on cinder block stilts, he played pretend with a girl down the street named Clara Poe. They peeked out from under the floor joists and waited for a car to rumble down Louisiana Avenue and fought over whose it was. "It's my car. No, it's my car." Then they pretended they were in the car, leaving. Clara always said she was going to Chicago, where her uncles were. But no matter how many times Clara said Chicago, Persing said he was going to California. He didn't have any family there. All he knew was that one day, somehow, whenever he got big and whatever it took, he was going. A burdensome labor. This land is first and foremost his handiwork. Wherever one looks in this land, whatever one sees that is the work of man, was erected by the toiling, straining bodies of blacks. David L. Cohn, God Shakes Creation. But the Egyptians mistreated and oppressed us, assigning us a burdensome labor. Deuteronomy, chapter 26, verse 6. Chickasaw County, Mississippi, 1929. Ida Mae Brandon Gladney. Ida Mae's new husband took her to live in a little wood cabin on Ed Pearson's plantation on a clearing past the Natchez Trace. Ida Mae was 16. In the morning, the sun poked at them through the gaps in the roof. At night, they could see the stars through the ceiling cracks over their bed. It just about rained inside as much as out. They set about working cotton for Mr. Ed. All around them, the land was in a state of being cotton or becoming cotton, brown and rutted for planting. Green shoots willed into rows of coddled bushes until the land was white out to the tree line. Every so often, a wood cabin broke the clearing, raw and thrown together, built uneasily on a footprint of land that was a fraction of what was devoted to the field. The people who lived in the cabins gave the best hours of their days to cotton, working until the sun went behind the trees and they couldn't see their hands anymore. Early morning, the mist rose over the fields and made a halo on the surface of the earth. Ida Mae's new husband and the sharecroppers working other sections of Pearson's land tried to pick as much as they could before the sun got high. Ed Monroe Pearson was a decent boss man, as decent as could be expected from a planter in Mississippi in the 1920s. He presided over the lives of some dozen families who grew his crops, as Ida Mae would recall, and he took half of whatever they produced, whether it was cotton or turkeys or hogs. At the end of the season, he deducted the debts he said they owed: cottonseed, fertilizer, implements, ginning fees, cornmeal, salt pork, the furnish, as it was called, of their half of the harvest. Money rarely changed hands between planter and sharecropper, as the entire system was built on credit. The sharecroppers owed the planters owed the merchants owed the banks, and the banks were often beholden to some business concern in the north, where most of the real money was in the first place. Unlike some planters, Mr. Ed actually gave George and Ida Mae a few dollars when settling time came at the end of the harvest, although they never knew whether they would get anything, or how much it might be, or if it was actually what they were due. Nor could they complain if it wasn't. Ed Pearson was about the best boss man a colored sharecropper could hope for. But he was a ranking member of the dominant caste and felt it within his right to involve himself in the private affairs of his serfs. He came through the field on his horse one day and saw George bent over picking through the rows. George and Ida Mae had been out for hours, and the sun had cooked their backs. Ida Mae had no gift for picking like her new husband did, and had fallen farther and farther behind, stooping from the weight of the sack. George had called out to her, but she was too far back and too beat from the sun to catch up. After a few dozen pounds, her knees gave way. She saw a clear path up ahead and dropped onto her sack, collapsed in the dirt aisle between the cotton rows. Mr. Ed rode up to George and questioned him about it. "Your wife don't do nothing, do she, but sit down," Mr. Ed said to George. George would have liked to have said it was his business and not Mr. Ed's, but colored men could not say such things to a white man in Mississippi and get away with it in 1929. When Mr. Ed was gone, George went back to Ida Mae. "See, can't you try and do a little bit better?" George said, caught between the two of them. She said she would try, but there was no use pretending. She was not going to be of much help in the field. She had never been able to pick 100 pounds. 100 was the magic number. It was the benchmark for payment when day pickers took to the field. 50 cents for 100 pounds of cotton in the 1920s, the gold standard of cotton picking. It was like picking 100 pounds of feathers, 100 pounds of lint dust. It was one of the most back-breaking forms of stoop labor ever known, wrote the historian Donald Hawley. It took some 70 bowls to make a single pound of cotton, which meant Ida May would have to pick 7,000 bowls to reach 100 pounds. It meant reaching past the branches into the cotton flower and pulling a soft lock of cotton the size of a walnut out of its pod. Doing this 7,000 times, and turning around and doing the same thing the next day and the day after that. The hands got cramped from the repetitive motion of picking, the fingers fairly locked in place and calloused from the pricks of the barbed, five-pointed cockleburs that cupped each precious bowl. The work was not so much hazardous as it was mind-numbing and endless, requiring them to pick from the moment the sun peeked over the tree line to the moment it fell behind the horizon and they could no longer see. After 10 or 12 hours, the pickers could barely stand up straight for all the stooping. Ida May had watched people do it all her life and knew how it was done. But when it came time to actually go out and pick it, she would look up and see everybody else far down the row. At weighing time, she would empty her sack on the scale and never get 3 digits. Above her was an entire economy she could not see, but which ruled her days and determined the contours of her life. There were bankers, planters, merchants, warehouse clerks, fertilizer wholesalers, seed sellers, plow makers, mule dealers, gin owners. A good crop and a high price made not much improvement to the material discomforts of Ida May's existence, but meant a planter's wife could begin to dream of a new parlor carpet and a piano, and a salesman of farm implements could be lavish with more expensive cigars than he smoked last year. On Wall Street, there were futures and commodities traders wagering on what the cotton she had yet to pick might go for next October. There were businessmen in Chicago needing Oxford shirts, socialites in New York and Philadelphia wanting lace curtains and organdy evening gowns. Closer to home, closer than one dared to contemplate, there were Klansmen needing their white cotton robes and hoods. In the half-light of morning, when the mist hung low and the dew was thick on the bowls, the pickers set out to the field as their slave foreparents had done year in and year out for 2 centuries. The first horn was blown an hour before daylight as a summons for work hands to rise. Each one looked out across the field to infinity. The quarry was spread over acres and rows far from the starting plant, and they could not see the end of what they were expected to pick. On large fields during the height of the season, which began in August in South Texas and moved eastward, reaching the Carolinas by early fall, the star pickers sped like fan blades through the cotton, a blur of fingers and bowls, arms and torsos, switching from the left row to the right, picking on both sides of them and tossing the cotton like feathers into their sack. The sacks were strapped over their shoulders and dragged in the dirt behind them like an extra limb, the sacks weighing as much as a human adult by the end of the day, and making them stoop all the more. They picked until they were hypnotized by the picking. By midday, the fast ones and the slow ones were far from the center, the stars way up ahead and not looking back, the slow ones trailing behind, the most watchful of everyone's placement. The field was flat and unbroken by trees, and there was no escape from the 100-degree heat. The sun bore down on them through the head rags and the Panama hats and made the cotton field shimmer like the ocean. Pickers thought they saw things like people who had died and come back, and waved a handkerchief in the air to call the water boy from under a shade tree. He was usually a picker's child, the one designated to fetch the bucket of well water when they needed it, half the water splashing out of the bucket and onto the ground as the water boy trudged down the rows. Throughout the Cotton Kingdom, the act of picking cotton was the same, but in the hills the cotton was sparser and shorter, not thick and shoulder-high like cotton in the Delta. It was harder to get 100, much less more. You had to pick a wider field and stoop to pick the lowest bowls to reach the same benchmark. There were ways to make life easier or harder for yourself when it came to picking cotton. Experienced pickers knew to pick in a rapid, flowing motion, trance-like and efficient. The strongest of the men like George, could pick 2 or 3 times their weight in cotton. 400 pounds gave a man bragging rights in anybody's field. A woman could hold her head up if she picked 100. It was a mean enough world that people got desperate. For one thing, for day pickers, there was the money. For another, there was their pride. And then there was the fact that they did not want to be there in the first place. Some people collected rocks, hid them in their pockets, and threw them into their sack at weighing time to make a heavier load. Some people picked the stalk and all to add extra weight. Some were the first out in the morning, picking early while the dew was on the bud, which meant much of the weight was water. It was a trick they could get away with, unless the planter set the cotton out in the sun to dry it out, which some did. When those who were so inclined didn't outright lard their sacks, they helped themselves to the peaches and berries on the edges of the boss's cotton and gave themselves a raise for breaking their backs in the field. Many years later, the people would stand up to water hoses and sheriff's dogs to be treated as equal. But for now, the people resisted in silent, everyday rebellions that would build up to a storm at mid-century. Rocks stuffed into cotton sacks in Mississippi at weighing time. The colored-only signs pulled from the seat backs of public buses and converted into dartboards in dorm rooms in Georgia. Teenagers sneaking into coffee shops and swiveling on the soda fountain stools forbidden to colored people in Florida, and then running out as fast as they'd come in before anybody could catch them. Each one fought in isolation and unbeknownst to the others, long before the marches and boycotts that were decades away. Sometime in the 1930s, a crew of pickers had been assembled to harvest a wide field of cotton near Brookhaven, Mississippi, some 200 miles south of Chickasaw County, where Ida Mae lived. On the crew was a big man who had just gotten out of Parchman prison. Word spread through the field that the man had killed somebody, but no one knew for sure. It was clear from the start that the man could pick. He was used to picking with a gun to his back. He could pick like a machine when he got paid for it. People could hardly pick for watching the man. One of the slower pickers was a teenager who figured if he could just stick behind the prisoner, he could make more money for himself. So he got behind him and did what he did, or tried to, anyway. The prisoner did not speak. He just picked until he was a faint figure in the distance. The slow picker fell behind, and when dusk approached, he knew from his sack that he was underweight. The other pickers headed to the scales, but the slow picker dragged his sack behind a tree. He looked to his left and to his right, and in front of him to see that no one was watching. Then he pulled down his coveralls. He opened the sack that represented a day's worth of work and his bent back, and the pennies he would get for this bent back, because he knew it did not amount to 100 pounds. That was when he positioned the sack just so, and relieved himself in the boss man's cotton for spite and the extra dime, because he didn't like having to pick cotton anyway. Ida Mae grew up isolated in the hills and never heard about these things until it was too late to do her any good. So she and her husband worked the piece of Pearson land apportioned to them with duty and resignation. She herself could not afford a dress made out of the cotton that ruled their days. What she wore was pieced together from flour sacks that she boiled for hours until the flour company's name finally faded away. Burlap scratching her skin, and the sun hunting her down. She dragged a sack behind her and plucked and picked, not figuring she was clothing a small piece of the world, and never giving much thought to where the contents would land.
Context of White Supremacy. The number to dial is 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. Press *6 if you would like to participate. Again, the number is 760-569-7676, and the code is 564943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. The only comment I will make, since we were talking about parallels, and I think that this is an important, painful, but important parallel. You have, I think this is George here. He was walking down the street when the white guy pulled up next to him. She wrote, Miss Wilkerson, she wrote, or excuse me, this is not George, this is Mr. Persing. Persing breathed deep. Ever since his sister Gold had hit puberty, he could hardly walk down the street with her without white men with snuff in their mouth yelling out what they would do to her. It made him want to vomit. She kept her head up and held his hand tight and walked through it. He could never defend her, never stand up to a gang of them on a street corner. That was death, he would say years later. Sadly, I believe that is still true today. We will hit the phone lines. The folks that are on the line, so we should have B. Moore, Demery 4, 909, the caller at 7892, female caller, and two other folks, S. Dot and one other caller. I want to try to get the people who have not participated. I think there's at least one person. I think our caller in Florida, I don't think he was with us before. If you want to go ahead and share, because I don't think we've heard from you, and then everybody else, your line should be open. Caller in Florida.
Greetings, everyone.
Greetings, sir.
I just came in on the second reading, and the first part I noticed was the differences in the white and non-white teachers' salaries. As a younger person, I can recall the stories later on about a similar situation taking place down here in South Florida, and the way the non-white black teachers found out of the differences in salary was in the line in the bank. I guess it would be maybe one white teacher who would reveal the difference in salary, in comparison, I guess while people were cashing their checks. And that was where the salary comparisons would take place. Nevertheless, in the non-white black communities, teachers were considered to be somewhat of some sort of upper echelon ranking on a social status basis. If you were a teacher, I can recall as a child in the area where I grew up at. There were some other things I should have wrote them down, but I didn't. That's why it's important to write things down. Trying to think what else as far as the. That's all I have right now. I'll speak up again when I get a chance, when I remember on what the other things that I remember was said during the segment.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
I can.
That segment was particularly painful. I mean, just to hear about the man who was being beat in the woods, and he said, And even after he knew they were going to kill him, he said, let me just pray first. And just hearing yet again another victim praying that prayer for their enemies, that we have just been so conditioned generation after generation to pray for those who prey upon us. It's just so painful to hear. And I mean, it's just humiliating to know that we've been subjected to so much, and to think that so many of us are subjected to a lot today. And folks, I can understand why, because of the dehumanizing aspect of it, just realizing that you are surrounded by these pathologically insane, sadistic people who have convinced themselves and everyone else that they're afraid of us. It's understandable why so many people refuse to talk about racism and practice escapism in response to this constant threat of being surrounded by these pathologically sadistic people.
Can I be heard?
I can hear you, but I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance because there are quite a few folks on the line. Just hold that thought for a moment, and I'll make sure everybody gets an opportunity to share.
Yes, sir.
I would agree with Doc. That was pretty painful. And it actually brought a thought to my mind. Now, I'm surprised I haven't thought about this before. It's like, when did whipping, non-white folks, black folks, ever stop? In my mind, I don't even associate whipping after slavery was sort of quote unquote ended, formal slavery. So to hear that piece was like, wow, I am not surprised, but I am surprised at the same time because I associate physical whippings with slavery. But who knows how many black folks were whipped until God knows when, probably still today with actual whips. Then I had to question, where did all the whips go? Where are these whips at? Where are they? Are they in museums? Are they in people's basements, in the attics? So I thought that was a very profound segment of this book, very interesting and eye-opening.
I'm going to mute my line. Just hearing all that, it reminded me of all the times we talk about how older black people, they did not discuss racism, white supremacy. Just a little bit that we've heard of this book, and I think we've only got about a quarter of it so far. This is a great illustration of why I could see black people not wanting to talk about this. As you all have said, it is humiliating, it's sad, it's depressing. Even just having to relive all this, I can imagine would be traumatic to have to tell your grandchildren or what have you about the time that you heard a black male being whipped and beaten to death and you couldn't do anything about it, or how many times you walked down the street with your sister with racists howling and making all manner of lewd comments and talking about what sexual perversions they would like to perform on your sister, and you have to smile and better not act like you don't like it for fear that you could both be killed, maybe even the whole town burned down in the blink of an eye. I can totally understand why black people would not want to talk about this at all. I'll mute my line.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I was born in Texas, but I had not heard about the white mob burning down the courthouse in Sherman, Texas, when Mr. George Hughes was being held in there. And it was, especially violent and heinous because the courthouse was set on fire. They jumped out the window, left the man in there to burn, and then cut the water hoses when they tried to put the fire out. I thought that was that's pretty brutal. Also like to mention something about Mr. Mantain Moreland. One of those actors from the old race films. He was born in Monroe, Louisiana. He was known for his large eyes and the humiliating characters that he played in the movies, mostly Charlie Chan, old Charlie Chan movies. But he made he appeared in over 60 films. So they mentioned that they were especially proud because he made it to Hollywood, but it was very degrading. And Stephen Fetchit and himself were later ridiculed by other blacks for having accepted stereotype roles. But during those times, that's all that was available for him. I've seen cotton, but I've never heard it being described in that manner. The way to pick it and how much and the adjectives used, and it was realistic the way she described that. You could get a picture of, how back-breaking and, just how hard that was. And now that cotton is it's harvested, by machines. But it's just to imagine human beings working that hard, it's mind-boggling. I'll mute my line.
Peace, can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. The talk of the new white school, I believe it was called Neville, just how big and quote-unquote great it was, 664,000 to build, no non-white people allowed in except to clean. I don't know, just hearing that was just making me sick. And I took note of that. And then the talk of the discrepancy in salary. It's like it exists, but just to hear it, and then the fact that they printed in the paper was like a kick me while I'm down move. And I thought about how it still happens to this day. I believe it was Dr. Shahrazad Ali, one of the callers had brought up how I believe a white male was paid more than her to appear on some program or something. I think it was her. I was kind of confused on whether it was her or Dr. Welding, but a caller brought it up when they were on the program. So I'm just, talking about how it still happens to this day. But I think it was Dr. Ali, but she wasn't even aware of it until the caller brought it up. The fact that Persing hated being called a boy even as a boy. But that's what racism, white supremacy will do to you, because they'll call you a boy even being, their elder or being, an older non-white person. And then I took note of the white males wanting to sexually sue or non-white females, and what he said he had to go through with his sister, and also to listen to white people being their terroristic selves, to hear about all the things they did with the burning and the looting from, I think they said, a non-white hotel. They burned the body with the furniture or something. Just to hear that, and then it goes on to say that non-white people fled to their quote-unquote white friends. I was just shaking my head. And yeah, that's all. Just that white friends thing. But yeah, that's all.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was kind of when I heard that part about gold and how how Persing felt like every time he walked with his sister, the little death because he couldn't defend her. Yeah, I definitely felt that. Like, I just felt what I felt about listening to it was like, not what I felt, but what I thought of is that, man, having a female child in that time, you know what I'm saying? I was just thinking of this movie where it was a Western, and they had come to save the town, but the men were noticing that there were no women around, and coming to find out that all the women were basically being hidden. You know what I'm saying? And I was just thinking, like, man, if I kind of felt like that's what I would have wanted to do with my daughter, like hide her, dress her in boys' clothes, you know what I'm saying? Until, just, even though that's, people might consider that cross-dressing or something, but it's just something to try and protect her, I just definitely thought of I just felt that fear, like, man, you have a female child, even today, like, man, what would I do, knowing that it's all kind of predators out, and especially white males. And I was thinking about taxation without representation and how people can think about that, like, even 401ks and all this stuff, like, people invest, they invest your money and they use your taxes and to fund the war machine or whatever. But when the school burnt down or burnt up, none of that money was so, like, I'm just thinking, like, were those people paying taxes? And and we're paying taxes now, but it's like people say taxation without representation. So it's just, I don't know, it's just interesting.
I think everybody except the female caller at 4028. Did you have anything you wanted to get in?
Yes. I was thinking about when the boss man was talking to the husband about his wife not picking cotton fast enough, or I can't remember the exact words, but she just sits around all day, or is that what he said? Just something to that effect.
It's the white master, and this was supposed to be that was one of those moments. Gorgeous black female. I need to see her picture. And this is one of those where I would have been happier if a white person had wrote this book, because I'd have went to town on that. Decent white man. This is like a slave owner racist, and he's decent. She did qualify it by saying, decent for the time, but I mean, why even use that term? At any rate, gorgeous black female. Lots of constructive information in the book. She won a Pulitzer Prize. It says, your wife don't do nothing, do she? But sit down, Mr. Ed said to George. George would have liked to have said it was his business and not Mr. Ed's, but colored men could not say such things to a white man in Mississippi and get away with it in 1929. When Mr. Ed was gone, George went back to Ida Mae. "See, can't you try and do a little better?" George said, caught between the two of them.
Yeah, I mean, that is so indicative of just so many things that is taking place today. You know, it's a lot of people out here talking about the masculinization of black women, you know, and it's like, yeah, I mean, where did that start? You have to work as hard as a man, basically, and if you don't, you know, I mean, in terms of today's language, you're just a lazy welfare queen, you know. If you're not working as hard, you know, that not seeing almost a difference, you know, and then having, you know, to say, you know, with the boss man or master, whatever you want to call it, standing over them, you know, can't you hurry up? You know, now this creates division, you know. I mean, and I just think about it in today's, context, in which, you know, the black woman says, well, can't you get a job? You understand? Not understanding the context of what's going on, you know, that they're unlikely to find one, you know. You know, I mean, it's just, when you hear some of these things, it's a wonder that we have any black marriages, you know. I mean, so, you know, when I hear about the marriage rate and all this stuff like that, I hate to say it, but based on what we have been through, I mean, we're doing pretty well. I mean, what can you expect after all these years of terrorism? What can you expect? Not that we should rest our laurels on that, but, man, we need to take a deep breath here. Gone through a lot. That's all I have to say.
You know, that's a good point. It reminds me of another book by Donna L. Franklin called What's Love Got to Do with It? And she kind of goes through the history of black relationships from pretty much slavery until, I think, the mid-'90s or 2000, early 2000s maybe. So that could be another book to check out. And she kind of highlights that, and she kind of concludes her book saying, you know, we are kind of fortunate to have the relationships we do have just by all the domination that we've been suffering from. So that's what that reminded me of.
And it's called What's Love Got to Do with It? That's the title?
Yep, Donna L. Franklin.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if anybody know, like when she was talking about all of these seeds that be planted from people coming back from the north, and you know, I kind of felt I thought about that. Like I had a relative that gave me the traveling bug, and you know, those stories of, you know, different places, and I just found that interesting. But at the same time, I remember kind of being a little bit, after a while, kind of thinking that, you know, he should have stayed with in the town, you know, that he grew up in, to help the people there. You know what I'm saying? We need help. So you go off to, you know, go overseas and do all of this, you know, work. But it's like, it just kind of, I just kind of took a mind out of the I mean, took a good mind out of their home, you know, where they grew up. But it's like, what could they do? Those seeds get planted. You want to leave. When people talk about different places and stuff, at the same time too, like it probably wasn't as good as they thought. But I mean, that was something that stuck out. like, what do you do in that situation? Like, seeds are getting planted, you wanted to leave. And the father, he was upset when his daughter was leaving. But at the same time, I'm sure he knew, like, man, you know, staying here, what really can I offer you here? So it's just interesting dynamic there too.
But you know, when they talk about that, you know, the whole North versus the South kind of thing, I just can't help but think about just the whole thing that, you know, one victim flossing for another victim. You know, when they said they barely could afford to send any of the money, you know, and they saved up, you know, most of the year to have an outfit just to go down there and say, hey, you know, this white man is treating me better than your white man. You know, you see the same thing today, you know, I mean, just this idea that because you go, you know, you have a higher position, you know, and you're not working on the outside, I mean, you're not on the inside or whatever, you know, that somehow one boss is better than the other. Not better, just different. A different form of tackiness and terrorism, as Neely Fuller would say.
Soothing lotion.
Yeah.
Showing off.
What was the quote the white man said? He said, "If you educate these blacks, then what
will we do for servants?"
Right. I mean, that's the bottom line right there. That's what had me thinking, like, okay, yeah, we're so dumb, but look at what you do. You know what I'm saying? We can't get a job at the airline, but that's what it is. We don't want to educate y'all, not because, you know, because we want servants. That's it. That's the.
I thought the white people dropped quite a few just honest jewels in the book. I guess some of these quotes were back from when white people felt no need to be refined about anything, so they just let it fly. To Demery 4, I think he said you spent some time in Texas. They have more information on that whole mob of white violence where they burned down the jail and hacked the hoses. I've heard that before, where they have burned down some black property or what have you, and the fire department came and they hacked the hoses to keep them from putting out the fire. Like, that seems to be a part of the white code. If it's a mob and they're going out to do something and they don't want the fire department to do it down, like, oh, make sure you cut the fire hose. But there's a book, it's called The Tragedy of Lynching, and it's by Arthur F. Raper, R-A-P-E-R, Arthur F. Raper, The Tragedy of Lynching. And it's supposed to have about 35 pages of information just on that incident in Texas, where they burned the place down and killed this black male, and then hoisted his body up after they had killed him. But that other quote from where the white people were just keeping it real when you all were talking about the schools, and they were just giving out all the information about how the difference in salaries and how that is multiplied out over generations. It reminded me when I said of when Malcolm X, his Minister Malcolm's grandson, recently passed. And I said, looking at that from a generational perspective, the mob violence that killed Minister Malcolm's father, then Minister Malcolm, white people indirectly responsible for that as well, and then his grandson, if you can pull back and get the aerial view of how racism, white supremacy operates. I thought that was beautifully well written when she broke down the generational impact of this wealth gap, racism, white supremacy, and the disparity in payment. But they said the money allocated to colored children is spent on the education of white children. A local school superintendent in Louisiana said bluntly, "We have twice as many colored children of school age as we have white, and we use their money. Colored children are mighty profitable to us." They're still doing the same thing now. They just don't make those type of blunt assessments. Same thing now, and it's going to be even worse now because they keep saying it's going to be more and more non-white people. Be the same thing. Good. We can just use all that for us. We have about 3 minutes left. Anything folks want to get in before we wrap up? I will mute my line.
That's an absolutely correct point. I had wrote that down too. When you look at how a lot of schools get funded through IEPs, like Dr. Umar Johnson talks about, when we look at social service agencies, they get a lot of funding by, the domination that non-white people suffer from, the prison industrial complexes. I mean, it just goes on and on. Our misery is profitable, and as long as we stay dominated, we get manipulated, and then there's financial contributions that come from it. So that's it.
Mm-hmm. I just want to ask if we were needed for service, if that was our purpose then, like, what's our purpose now?
To continue to be victimized. That's what comes to mind for me.
I think it's.
I don't know. I wonder about that because they have tons of non-white people to victimize. Tons of non-white people. You know, remember they're the minority.
I think it's the same thing. Servants, man. That's what the education. That's what the so-called education system is just churning out. Like, that piece about the servants is still going on today, like full force. That's their stated position as far as the education. It's churn out these not to turn out these workers, you know, not entrepreneurs, not business people, but workers. That's what these school systems. That's what these schools are meant to do. That's it.
Yeah, but as far as like servants go, I mean, they have, you know, so-called Hispanics for that now. I mean, so what I'm saying is, like, in terms of our usefulness to white people, you know, I don't see it anymore. Like, what motivation do they have to keep us around? I mean, I know they said they won't, you know, kill all of us, but what's their motivation when they have tons of other non-white victims to brutalize and to use as servants?
It goes back to that beating or whatever. That's their entertainment. Like, we're going to take a break here, get some water, freshen up. We'll be back to the beating in a minute. Like, that's what it reminds me of. Like, we're their entertainment, all that brutalization, and that's our use for that. That's how they, you know, that's why they won't let us go anywhere or do anything. It's just. I think. I wanted to say also too. I mean, I hope that you can. But when he prayed and he said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," I was just thinking that's what Jesus said when he was on the, you know, in the book, like when he was on the cross, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." So I was thinking that maybe when he was praying, he was trying to appeal to. He was going straight to Jesus, like, okay, y'all Christians, so let me quote Jesus here and see if that'll work. You know, he went for the Jesus quote. You know, just trying to save his own life and whatever.
Anything else folks need to get in? We all good? Right on. We will be back tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, and 6 p.m. Pacific. The compensatory call-in. It's been a pretty active week. Whole summer, really. I feel like racism has been the front page topic worldwide for most of the summer. Nothing on Lee Daniels, though, thank goodness. Tune in tomorrow, and Renethia Tate, she should be with us on Sunday, author of Pieces of a Puzzle. Sunday evening, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. I think it would be no surprise to her, the anecdotes about white men riding through black areas asking to pick up colored girls. No surprise to her at all, and that would be another one that I would say has not stopped. 2013, you still got that going on. We will be back tomorrow. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Invest if you think the program is constructive. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. PayPal is in the top right corner. Listener supported. You can also check out the wish list at Amazon.com under Gus T Renegade. Trying to get my brand new cable for my hard drive. If you have $3, easy way to contribute. Again, at Amazon.com, just search for Gus T Renegade. You will see the wish list. Thanks all for tuning in. Anybody want to do the prayer to wrap things up? Right on. I will knock that out too. We will be back tomorrow. I hope it has been a constructive investment of your Friday evening. We will be looking forward to the segment next Friday. Number 4, we are a quarter of the way through the book, making progress. Creator, make certain that we do not forget all that our family has endured under the centuries of white terrorism. All of the information, incidents of abuse, all of that should fuel us to remain focused, codified, serious about permanently neutralizing racist man, racist woman, and racist child. Our family, they are watching and supporting our efforts. Make sure they are not forgotten. Help them keep us motivated to fulfill our assignment. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Context of White Supremacy signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
I'm a victim, brother.
No problem. You're a victim.
I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my condition.
Mm-hmm.
Even my conditioning has been conditioned.